Hey guys, tonight we are heading back in time, and way out west. We're going to the American frontier of the late 1800s. Forget the heroic cowboys and the triumphant marches of progress for a moment. We're going to explore a side of the Wild West that doesn't get much screen time, the quiet, constant danger that came with being a beautiful woman in a place with very few rules. Honestly, if you were dropped into this world, your good looks might actually be the thing that gets you into the most trouble. It's a world where being noticed wasn't a compliment, it was a threat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps the channel find other people like you who enjoy drifting off to these strange little corners of history. And while you're at it, I'd love to see where you're all listening from. Drop your city and the time in the comments below. It's always a quiet thrill for me to see this little community stretching all across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan to that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The journey itself has been a trial for weeks. The rhythmic jolting of the stagecoach has been your only constant companion, a rough percussion against your bones. The air inside is thick with the scent of stale sweat, old leather, and a fine, pervasive dust that coats everything: your tongue, your eyelashes, the dark fabric of your dress. And then, one afternoon, the rocking stops, the driver bellows something unintelligible, and the heavy door is thrown open, flooding the cramped space with a rectangle of blinding, white-hot light. You've arrived. You gather your small satchel, straighten your bonnet as best you can, and carefully descend the high steps onto solid ground. Or what passes for solid ground? Your fine, city-made boots sink immediately into a thick, churned-up mixture of mud and manure. The main street of this town, a place called Prosperity or New Hope or some other tragically optimistic name, is less of a street and more of a long, brown wound carved into the earth. But it's not the mud that makes you freeze, it's the silence. A moment ago, the town was a cacophony, the tinny plinking of a piano from a saloon, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the low murmur of men's voices. The second your boot touched the ground, all of it seemed to fall away. The hammering stops, the piano hesitates, the conversations die in men's throats, and you feel it, instantly. The weight of eyes, dozens of them. From the covered porch of the general store, a group of miners, their faces smudged with dirt and beards matted with who knows what, stop their card game to stare. A lone cowboy, leaning against a hitching post, slowly straightens up, his gaze sweeping over you from head to toe, lingering for a moment too long. Even the respectable-looking man in a suit, the town banker perhaps, pauses on the wooden sidewalk, his appraisal no less intense for being more discreet. You realize with a sinking feeling, the most interesting thing to happen to this town all week, maybe all month. This is a classic Western boomtown, a place that has exploded into existence almost overnight because of gold, or silver, or the promise of a coming railroad. This is a mainstream historical fact. These towns were chaotic, overwhelmingly male, and grew far faster than any semblance of law or social structure could keep up with. They were magnets for single men seeking their fortune, resulting in a demographic imbalance that is staggering to a modern mind. In some of these frontier locations, men outnumbered women by 10 to 1, and in the more remote mining camps, it could be 100 to 1. You are not just a person here, you are a novelty, a spectacle. You feel less like a traveler and more like a rare bird that has just landed in a field full of hungry cats. As you take a hesitant step towards what looks like a hotel, you become acutely aware of the swish of your skirts, the tiny, almost imperceptible details of your appearance, the lace on your cuffs, the way a stray curl has escaped your bonnet. In the East, these were marks of modest respectability. Here, they are signals of something else entirely different: delicacy, and, most dangerously, unadmittably. And here's a little, slightly disgusting tidbit of daily life you notice immediately: the smell. It's not just the manure. It's the outhouses, the unwashed bodies, the cheap whiskey, and something vaguely metallic you can't quite place. You also see the town sanitation system in action, a few stray pigs rooting around in the muck of the main street. A common and rather grimly practical solution to garbage disposal in many frontier towns. They were, for all intents and purposes, the municipal cleaning crew. The walk from the stagecoach to the hotel entrance, a distance of maybe 50 feet, feels like a mile. You keep your eyes down, fixed on navigating the treacherous terrain of the street, but you can feel the stairs burning into the side of your face. You hear a low whistle from the direction of the saloon. Someone makes a crude comment, followed by a burst of rough laughter. You clutch your satchel tighter, your knuckles white, the promise of a new beginning, which had seemed so bright in the letters you read back home, now feels terrifyingly fragile. You've just arrived, but you already understand that in a place like this, beauty isn't an asset, it's a liability. It marks you, singles you out, and turns your every public move into a performance for an audience you never asked for. Historians and sociologists still debate the precise nature of this intense frontier gaze. Was it purely predatory, the objectification of women in a raw, lawless environment, or was it complicated by a profound, almost pathetic sense of loneliness and social starvation? Many of these men hadn't spoken to a woman who wasn't a relative or a prostitute in years. The sight of you, a symbol of the ordered, civilized world they'd left behind, might have sparked a strange mix of awe, desire, and resentment. It's a debate that doesn't change the feeling in your gut right now, the feeling of being watched, judged, and above all, wanted, in a way that has nothing to do with who you are and everything to do with what you look like. You push open the heavy hotel door, enter a blessed moment. The world softens. The air inside is cooler, smelling faintly of sawdust and stale tobacco, but it's a relief from the oppressive heat and stench of the street. The lobby is a small, dim space, dominated by a long wooden desk. Behind it, a man with a magnificent, well-oiled mustache and tired eyes looks up from a ledger. His eyes widen almost comically when he sees you, and he immediately stands up, wiping his hands on his apron as if he's just been caught doing something improper. "No," he says, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. "Welcome to the Grand Excelsior. Not so grand, I'm afraid, but the beds are, well, they're beds." He gives a small, nervous laugh. His attempt at courtesy is so earnest it's almost painful. He fusses with the registration book, pushes it towards you, and offers a pen with a flourish that seems out of place on his large, callous hand. As you sign your name, you're aware of his gaze on you, but it's different from the stares outside. It's less predatory and more astonished, like he's seeing a ghost from a past life. He gives you a key attached to a heavy brass tag. Room 7, top of the stairs. It's the quietest one we've got. You thank him, your own voice sounding small and foreign, as you ascend the creaking staircase. You understand what he meant. This place was built for men, by men. It's functional, sturdy, and utterly devoid of any comfort or charm. Your room is exactly as promised, a bed with a lumpy mattress, a small washed sand with a pitcher and bowl, one straight-backed chair, and a single window overlooking the main street. There are no curtains. You drop your satchel on the bed and walk to the window, drawn by the morbid curiosity to see the world that has so openly gawped at you. From up here, you are an anonymous observer. The town spreads out below, a chaotic tableau of masculine energy. You see men haggling over the price of a mule, men carrying sacks of flour on their shoulders, men emerging from the saloon, blinking in the harsh sunlight. There are no other women in sight, no mothers chasing children, no friends chatting on a corner, just men. It's a society with a missing piece, and the void it leaves is palpable. This is the central, unvarnished truth of your new reality. A historical fact as solid as the gold they pull from the hills, the staggering gender imbalance. The Great Westward Rush was overwhelmingly a male affair. The California Gold Rush, the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, the long cattle drives from Texas. These were industries that demanded a workforce of young, unattached, and hardy men. Women, especially respectable single women, were a rarity. You've heard the numbers, but saying it is different. It's not an abstract statistic anymore, it's the air you breathe. You quickly realize that in this imbalance world, you are defined not by who you are, but by what you are not a man. Your scarcity has turned you into a commodity before you've even unpacked your bag. As evening begins to settle, casting long, distorted shadows down the street, the sounds change. The tinny piano in the saloon starts up again, more boisterous this time. Laughter, raw and loud, spills out every time the batwing doors swing open, and then you see something truly strange. A little-known detail of frontier life that perfectly illustrates the social starvation of this place. Through the saloon doors, you catch glimpses of men dancing with each other. It wasn't uncommon in towns with few or no female partners. To differentiate the roles, one male, the lady, would tie a handkerchief or a strip of cloth around his arm. It's a strangely poignant sight, these huge, rough-looking men, some still coated in the grime of their work, carefully waltzing with one another to a badly played tune, a clumsy imitation of a civilized ritual they all missed. It's a bizarre and almost comical spectacle, but it sends a chill down your spine. That desperation, that profound lack of female companionship, is the very thing that makes your own presence so fraught with peril. The attention you receive isn't just about fleeting desire. It's about a deep, structural scarcity. You are a walking, talking oasis in the middle of a vast desert, and every man in this town is thirsty. You finally step back from the window. The image of the dancing men burned into your mind. You press the lock on your door, a flimsy little thing that looks like it could be defeated with a firm shove. The thin walls do little to mute the sounds from below. A sudden shout, a crash of glass, the unending, frantic piano. You are alone, in a locked room, in a town full of lonely, desperate men. And here, in the quiet of your room, you begin to understand the immense pressure that will be placed upon you. Academics today still argue about the true meaning of the civilizing woman rope in the West. Was the call for good women to come west a genuine belief that female piety and domesticity could tame the frontier's wildness, or was it, as some historians suggest, a more cynical form of social control, a way to use the ideal of womanhood to police the behavior of the few real women who were actually their men might claim they want you to bring refinement and order, but what many of them truly want is to possess a symbol of it. To them, civilizing the West might just be a pretty phrase for claiming its most valuable and rarest prize, your virtue, your reputation. Your every smile or nod will be scrutinized, not just for what it is, but for what it represents in this unbalanced, hungry world. Scarcity, you now know, doesn't just increase value, it invites competition, and in a place with no rules, competition can be deadly. The next morning, you wake to the unsettling realization that you slept in your clothes, too anxious to even undress. The sun is already high, and the sounds of the town are back to their daytime rhythm of work and commerce. Hunger gnaws at you, a practical need that forces you out of the relative safety of your room. You have to eat. You have to buy supplies. You have to venture back out into that sea of eyes, taking a deep breath. You smooth your dress, check your bonnet in the small, cloudy mirror, and prepare for the ordeal. Your destination is the general store, which you spotted yesterday. It's a short walk, but it feels like running a gauntlet as you step onto the wooden boardwalk. The familiar sensation returns. A man mending a saddle looks up and just stops. His hands, holding a needle and thread, freeze in midair. Two men carrying a barrel halt in their tracks, one of them murmuring something to the other, who then cranes his neck to get a better look at you. It's as if you're a walking eclipse, a celestial event that demands every earnest's immediate and undivided attention. You try a smile, Polite nod, the kind of gesture you'd give anyone back home. The effect is immediate and alarming. The man mending the saddle scrambles to his feet, tipping his hat so enthusiastically it nearly falls off. The men with the barrel break into wide, gap-toothed grins. Your simple act of courtesy has been interpreted as encouragement. A signal. You quickly look away, your cheeks burning, and pick up your pace. Inside the general store, the air is thick with the competing smells of coffee beans, cured meats, pickles, and oiled leather. The proprietor, a weary man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, is in the middle of weighing out some flour for a customer. A big, bearded miner. Both of them turn as you enter, the bell above the door announcing your arrival with a cheerful jingle that feels wildly inappropriate. "Morning, no?" the storekeeper says, his tone a mixture of respect and surprise. The miner just stares, his mouth slightly agape. You politely ask for some dried biscuits and a small bag of coffee. As the storekeeper measures them out, another man enters the store. He sees you, and instead of waiting his turn, he walks right up to the counter. "Well now, what have we here?" he says, his voice slick and confident. HES better dressed than most, with a fancy vest and a clean shirt. I rise among the thorns. He leans against the counter, positioning himself directly in your path. "I drink for the lady, the saloon's just next door. Best whiskey this side of the Mississippi." You offer a tight, polite smile. "No, thank you. I was just leaving." He doesn't move. "Surely you have time for a little chat. A pretty thing like you shouldn't be all alone." This is the double-edged sword of your appearance in action. The historical reality is that in the West, a woman's beauty could, in very specific circumstances, be a minor social lubricant. It might get you slightly better service, a bit of fun and courtesy from a storekeeper, or as this man is offering, a free drink. It was a form of currency, traded for small favors and fleeting moments of politeness in a rough world. But the blade cuts both ways. The very thing that earns you a moment of preferential treatment is also what attracts this kind of unwanted, persistent attention. Your beauty has made you visible, but it has also made you a target. The miner who was there first, the big, quiet man, shifts his weight. She said no. He grunts, his voice a low rumble. The well-dressed man turns, a sneer on his face. "This ain't your concern, friend. The lady and I are just getting acquainted." A tense silence fills the small store. The storekeeper nervously finishes bagging your coffee, his hands trembling slightly. You are trapped between two men, a potential flashpoint for a conflict that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with the fact that you exist here, in this form. This is the danger you couldn't have understood from reading letters back home. It's not about dramatic villainy. It's about the constant, simmering aggression that your mere presence can ignite. Here's a bizarre, cold little fact about Frontier just as you're about to witness often. Insults between men were settled more quickly and violently than actual crimes. While a theft might require a sheriff and a trial, a perceived slight to a man's honor, especially in front of a woman, could result in immediate violence. The social codes were written around male pride, and you have just become the unwitting prize in a contest of it. Thankfully, the storekeeper intervenes, sliding your package across the counter. "That LL be 40 cents. None." His voice is a desperate attempt to de-escalate, to bring the interaction back to a normal commercial transaction. You fumble in your reticule for the coins, your fingers clumsy with nerves. You pay him, grab your small bag, and murmur a thank you to the room at large. "Don't walk you to your hotel." The miner grunts, stepping forward. "She don't need your help." The sick man snaps back. You don't wait to see how it resolves. You turn and walk out of the store as quickly as you can without breaking into a full run. The bell jingles mockingly behind you. You don't look back. You just hurry down the boardwalk, your heart pounding a frantic rhythm against your ribs. You've been in town for less than a day, and you've already nearly caused a fight just by trying to buy biscuits. Historians still debate the extent to which women in this situation could exercise agency. Some argue that women learn it to skillfully navigate these interactions, using subtle cues and social intelligence to diffuse tension and play potential suitors against each other for protection. Others maintain that this view romanticizes a grim reality, and that for most women, it was simply a state of constant, exhausting vigilance with very little room for error. One wrong smile, one misinterpreted word, could have explosive consequences. As you hurry back to the flimsy security of your hotel room, you aren't feeling particularly skillful or empowered. You just feel like prey. The drink was offered for free, but the price, you now understand, was far too high. Back in your room, the biscuits taste like chalk and the coffee is bitter. It's sustenance, but not a meal. As the day wears on, a more pressing issue emerges. The hotel has no dining room. The mustachioed proprietor informs you of this with a shrug of apology. He says most folks just eat at the saloon. He directs you to the Golden Garter, the very place you saw the men dancing the night before, the source of the crude whistle that followed you down the street. Your stomach clenches at the thought, but hunger is a relentless negotiator. You reason that it's a public establishment, and surely a person can just eat a quiet meal. It's a dangerously naive assumption. Summoning your courage, you walk the short distance and push through the swinging batwing doors. The immediate sensory assault is overwhelming. A wall of thick, blue-gray smoke hits you first, carrying the layered smells of cheap cigars, spilled whiskey, fine food, and unwashed humanity. The noise is a deafening roar, a frantically played piano battling with loud-mouthed arguments, bursts of laughter, and the clinking of glasses. And just like on the street, the moment you step inside, a wave of silence spreads out from the doorway. The piano player's hands falter on the keys. Conversations trail off mid-sentence. Every head in the crowded room turns towards you. But this silence is different. It's not just appraisal. It's shock, disbelief. You're a churchgoer who has just walked into a brothel. A respectable woman does not enter a saloon, not unless she's with a husband or part of a temperance league smashing the place up. Your presence is a breach of an unspoken, but rigid, social code. Then, your eyes adjust to the dim, smoky light, and you see them, on a small, slightly raised stage at the far end of the room, and mingling with the men at the tables, are the only other women in the establishment. They're all thin. They are a flush of vibrant, almost violent color in the otherwise brown and grey room. One wears a dress of garish scarlet satin, another a deep purple that looks bruised in the lamplight. Their faces are powdered as dark white, with bold circles of rouge on their cheeks and darkly lined eyes. Their hair is piled high in elaborate curls that would be scandalous on a public street. They are loud, their laughter practiced and piercing, their movements professionally fluid as they navigate the crowded floor. These are the soiled doves, or calico queens, or a dozen other euphemisms coined to soften a harsh reality. This is a core historical truth of the West in a world starved of female company. A thriving industry of sex work and entertainment filled the void. These women were a fundamental part of the frontier economy and social life. They were the hostesses, the dance partners, the confidantes, and the prostitutes for a vast population of lonely men. They were simultaneously the most visible and the most ostracized women in town. You watch one of them, a woman with fiery red hair, expertly handle a boisterous stable of minors. She laughs at a joke that makes you blush from across the room, pours them another round of drinks with a flick of her wrist, and deftly dodges a hand that tries to grab her waist. There's a hardness in her eyes that her painted-on smile doesn't quite reach. You see another girl, younger, sitting on a gambler's lap, looking bored as he whispers in her ear. She stares into the middle distance, her expression blank, until he nudges her, and she produces a dazzling, empty smile on command. They are the town's brightest lanterns, and also its most disposable commodities. while you stand frozen by the door. The saloon keeper, a large, bald man with a stained apron, bustles over. Lost? Mommy asks, his voice surprisingly gentle. You explain you're just looking for a hot meal. He seems to take pity on you and gestures to a small, secluded table in a dark corner, as far away from the main action as possible. Sit here, he says. I'll have Sadie bring you something. From this vantage point, you observe the inner workings of their world. You notice that when the girls persuade men to buy them a drink, the bartender often serves them from a special bottle. This was the percentage system, a common and rather clever little scam. The girls often drank colored water or wheat tea, while the customer was charged the full price for top-shelf whiskey. The girl would then get a cut of that inflated price, sometimes as much as 50%. For many, this was their primary and safest source of income, a commission-based hustle that relied on their charm and wit rather than their bodies. It was business. As you eat the plate of greases to that Sadie wordlessly brings you, you can't help but compare your situation to theirs. You are both women alone in a man's world. You both rely on your appearance and your ability to manage male attention, but they are playing a far more dangerous and complex game. They have rules, a system, and a strange, brittle kind of power within these four walls. You have none of that. Historians have long been locked in a debate over the lives of these women. The traditional view paints them as tragic victims, forced into the life by poverty, abuse, or abduction, with no hope of escape. And for many, that was undoubtedly the truth. But more recent scholarship has complicated this picture, suggesting that for a small but significant number of women, becoming a saloon girl or a prostitute was a conscious, albeit risky, choice. In a world where a respectable woman's options were limited to being a poorly paid teacher, a domestic servant, or a wife, the world of the saloon offered a slim chance at something unheard of: financial independence. A successful prostitute or madam could earn more money than any man in town, save for the luckiest of prospectors. It was a devil's bargain, trading social acceptance and physical safety for a degree of economic freedom that was otherwise unattainable. You watch the redhead expertly coax another $5 from a drunken cowboy for a bottle of champagne. She is skilled. She is a professional. And you realize, with a sudden, chilling clarity, that the line separating you from them is perilously thin. It is a line drawn by reputation, by luck, and by a series of choices you have yet to make. In this world, you are both beautiful objects. The only difference is the price tag and the packaging. You finish your stew as quickly as you can, the noise and smoke of the saloon pressing in on you as you prepare to leave. You overhear a sharp exchange near the bar. It's Sadie, the girl who brought you your food, and the bald saloon keeper, HES, looking at a small tear in the sleeve of her blue taffeta dress. That's coming out of your pay, he says, his voice no longer gentle. That's French lace. That is. Costs a fortune. He ripped it, Sadie says, her voice low and tight. Drunk fool grabbed me. And it's your job to not get grabbed, isn't it? The man retorts, turning his back on her to serve a customer. You want to wear the fancy dresses. You take care of the fancy dresses. Sadie's shoulders slump. The brief flash of defiance in her eyes is extinguished, replaced by a weary resignation. She turns away from the bar and her eyes meet yours for a fleeting second. In that glance, you see the entire, unspoken contract of her existence. The beautiful clothes, the powdered faces, the seemingly glamorous life. You now see it for what it is: a gilded cage. Every element of their alluring appearance is not their own. This is a crucial historical point about the business of the frontier saloon. The women rarely owned their extravagant wardrobes. The dresses, the costumes, the jewelry, even the perfume, were provided by the saloon owner or the madam, but they weren't gifts. They were debt. The cost of these items was recorded in a ledger, and the women had to work to pay it off. A dress might be marked up to 10 times its actual cost. Room and board were also deducted at inflated rates. This system, known as their peonage, was designed to be inescapable. A woman would arrive, often with nothing, and be instantly saddled with a debt so large she could never hope to pay it off. Especially on the unpredictable income of a saloon girl, she was trapped, bound to the establishment not by chains, but by an accountant's ledger. The glamorous facade was a carefully constructed prison, designed to keep her profitable and compliant. Curious and a little horrified, you watch as another girl, the one in the scarlet dress, retires with a client. They don't go upstairs. They head to a back hallway where a series of small, cramped rooms are located. These were often called cribs. Forget the cinematic depiction of lavish boudoir rest, the reality for most was grimly functional. A typical crib was barely larger than the bed it contained, often with just a basin and a pitcher for washing. Sometimes there were even sheds located behind the main building, exposed to the elements. The romance of her profession ends at a door that leads to a tiny, undecorated cell. And here's a particularly strange and sad little fact about this life: the use of opium and its derivatives, like laudanum, was rampant. Laudanum, an alcoholic tincture of opium, was cheap, legal, and available over the counter at any general store or pharmacy. It was marketed as a remedy for everything from menstrual cramps and anxiety to a common cough. For women living in constant physical and emotional distress, it became a crutch, then a necessity, and finally, a devastating addiction. The quiet, listless girl you saw sitting on the gambler's lap, her vacant stare might not have been boredom. It could have been the telltale sign of an opiate haze, a chemical escape from a reality that was too harsh to bear. You put some coins on your table and stand to leave, feeling like an intruder in a world of complex miseries. As you pass the bar, you see the ledger the saloon keeper was arguing over. It's open on the counter, in neat, cruel columns are named Sadie, Lola, Bella. Next to them, a list of charges: dress repair, board, laundry, doctor's visit. The numbers are staggering. Sadie's tear was just a tear. It was another entry in a book that ensured she would be here tomorrow, and the day after, still trying to pay off the price of the cage she wore. Historians are still piecing together the full economic picture of these establishments, and there's a debate about the fine system. Was it purely an exploitative tool to maximize profit and control, or was it also a twisted, brutal form of risk management for the saloon owner, a woman who was too often sick, or who damaged the company property, her clothes, or who antagonized wealthy clients? Was a liability. The fines were a way to codify her performance, turning her very existence into a balance sheet of profit and loss. This debate doesn't change the outcome for the women. Of course, they were human inventory, and their beauty was the most valuable and most heavily indebted asset on the books. You push back through the battering doors and into the cool night air, taking a deep breath as if surfacing from underwater. The main street seems almost peaceful now in comparison to the suffocating performance inside the Golden Garter. The painted smiles, the hollow laughter, the silent calculations of debt and desire, it all paints a far grimmer picture of the West than you had ever imagined. The beauty of the soiled doves wasn't a source of power, it was the collateral for their captivity. It was the bait in a trap from which there was very little chance of escape. Over the next few days, you try to establish a routine, to carve out a small, defensible space for yourself in this chaotic town. You learn which times of day the main street is busiest and best avoided. You discover that the baker's wife, a stern German woman who rarely smiles, will sell you bread from her back door if you knock at precisely 6, saving you a trip to the general store. These small acts of strategy are your only armor. One afternoon, seeking a bit of fresh air away from the main street, you walk towards the edge of town where the buildings give way to scrubby hills. You notice a slightly larger, better maintained house set back from the others. It has a small, tidy garden in front, a rarity in this dusty place. A woman is on the porch, shaking out a rug. She's older, with silvering hair pulled into a severe bun, and she wears a simple, dark dress. She looks like the epitome of frontier respectability. But as you draw closer, You see, it's the woman who runs the Golden Garter Saloon, the one the men call Madame Rose. She sees you looking and doesn't scowl or turn away. Instead, she gives a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Emboldened, or perhaps just lonely, you find yourself walking closer. That's a beautiful garden, you say, the words sounding clumsy in the quiet air. Hard work, she replies, her voice raspy but clear. This land doesn't want to grow anything but rocks and trouble. She studies you for a moment, her eyes sharp and intelligent. You're the new face, the one staying at the hotel. Yuri causing quite a stir. You know. Her directness is disarming. You murmur something about not meaning to. She gives a short, dry laugh. You don't have to mean to. You just have to be. That's the first lesson out here. This is your introduction to one of the most complex and morally ambiguous figures in the Wild West, the saloon madame. In the popular imagination, she's often portrayed as either a heartless villain who exploits young women, or a benevolent matriarch with a heart of gold who protects her girls. The historical reality, as you're beginning to see in Madame Rose, was usually a messy combination of both. She is, first and foremost, a business owner. She is the one who keeps the ledgers, orders the liquor, pays off the sheriff to look the other way, and enforces the brutal rules of debt and fines that keep women like Sadie trapped. She is, in no uncertain terms, an exploiter. Her profit is directly tied to the commodification of the women who work for her. But in the same breath, she is also their only shield. She's the one who throws out a dangerously violent client. She's the one who will call the town's often inebriated doctor when a girl is sick. She negotiates the complex social terrain of the town, ensuring a steady stream of customers without letting the saloon descend into utter chaos. In a world with no other safety net, her protection, however conditional and self-serving, is better than nothing. She is both jailer and warden, and the line between the two is constantly shifting. You think my girls are just pretty trinkets, Madame Rose says, as if reading your mind. And they are, but they're also survivors. Every single one of them has a story that would make your respectable hair stand on end. I give them a roof, a hot meal, and a way to earn. It's more than most of them had before they got here. Is it a justification, a lie she tells herself, or is there a kernel of truth in it? The origins of madams themselves are a fascinating and often obscure part of history. A little-known fact is that many madams were former prostitutes themselves. They were the rare few who had the business acumen, toughness, and sheer luck to climb the ladder. They had survived the life and now managed it from the other side. This meant they understood the dangers and the dynamics in a way no man ever could, but it didn't necessarily make them more compassionate. Sometimes, it just made them more effective and ruthless managers. She invites you onto the porch for a glass of water, and as she talks, you get a glimpse into the rigid hierarchy she maintains. There's the dancers, she explains, the ones who just talk and serve drinks. Then there's the ones who go to the back rooms. They make more, but the risk is higher. I try to keep the new ones on the floor as long as I can, give them time to learn the ropes. It's a cold, calculated system of managing human assets, sorting them by function and risk. The academic debate around these women is fierce. Were they pioneering female entrepreneurs, carving out a niche of power in a patriarchal world? Were they simply cogs in the machine of female exploitation, perpetuating a system that had once victimized them? The truth is likely that they were both. Figures like the infamous Dora Dufran in Deadwood or Big Nose Kate in Tombstone were legends in their own time, feared, respected, and wealthy. They owned property, ran complex businesses, and wielded significant informal power. They achieved a level of autonomy that was almost impossible for other women, but they did so on the backs of the women they employed. As you finish your water and thank her for her time, Madame Rose gives you a final piece of advice. This town eats innocence for breakfast, child. You carry yourself like you're made of glass. Out here, you'd be better off being made of stone. Walking back to your hotel, her words echo in your mind. You had seen the saloon as a place of simple vice. Now you see it as a complex, self-contained ecosystem with its own queen, its own rules, and its own brutal logic of survival. Madame Rose isn't just a character, she's a function of this unbalanced world. She's the regulator, the manager, and the gatekeeper of the gilded cage. She offers a terrible kind of safety, a predatory form of order, and you realize that her existence is proof of just how dangerous this world is for a woman without a protector. She has simply found a way to monetize that danger. A week later, the town is buzzing with a low, anxious energy. One of Madame Rose's girls, the young, listless one you saw on the gambler's lap, has fallen gravely ill. Whispers move through the saloons and the general store like a bad wind. People avoid looking at the golden garter as they pass, as if the sickness might be contagious through a simple glance. This isn't just a quiet concern for a fellow human's well-being, it's a fear that strikes at the heart of the town's primary form of recreation. You learn her name is Leela. The sickness came on fast: a fever, a debilitating weakness, and a wrecking cough. The town doctor, a man whose medical training is rumored to have consisted of a 6-week correspondence course and a stint as a battlefield barber, has been in and out of the saloon. His diagnosis changes daily. One day it's lung fever, the next it's bad blood. This brings you face to face with the invisible price of life and the gilded cage, the staggering toll of disease. This is a well-documented and tragic historical reality of the 19th century sex trade. Venereal diseases, primarily syphilis and gonorrhea, were rampant. Without antibiotics, they were devastating, leading to chronic pain, sterility, madness, and eventually, death. The so-called cures were often as dangerous as the diseases themselves. The primary treatment for syphilis, for instance, was mercury. Patients were given mercury pills, rubbed with mercury ointments, or even made to sit in vapor cabinets filled with mercury fumes. The side effects were horrific: tooth kidney failure, and severe neurological damage. It was a poison used to fight a poison, and it's a grim irony that many died from the cure, not the ailment. Beyond venereal disease, their crowded living conditions and constant contact with a transient population made them vulnerable to everything else: tuberculosis, influenza, pneumonia. Their beauty, the very asset they traded on, was under constant assault from within and without. A persistent cough, a skin lesion, a noticeable tremor. These weren't just symptoms of illness, they were threats to their livelihood. You see the town doctor leaving the saloon one afternoon, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. You overhear him talking to the sheriff. "Not much more I can do," he says with a sigh. "It's in the Lord's hands now." The pronouncement is made with a casual finality that chills you to the bone. Curious about the medical practices of the time, you later see a small advertisement tacked to the wall of the post office. It's for a patent medicine drive, Abernathy's miraculous revitalizing tonic. The ad promises to cure everything from female complaints and nervousness to consumption and liver ailments. This was the golden age of quackery. And here's a little fact: many of these popular patent medicines were outrageously potent concoctions of alcohol, opium, and sometimes even cocaine or cannabis. One of the most famous, liability, Pinkham's vegetable compound, a remedy marketed specifically to women, was nearly 20% alcohol. For a woman in a temperance-minded household, it was a socially acceptable way to get a stiff drink. For a woman like Leela, these tonics might offer a brief, hazy respite from her suffering, but they did nothing to cure the underlying disease. They were palliative, not curative, and highly addictive. A few days later, the sound of the saloon piano is conspicuously absent. The mood in town is somber. The word comes down: Leela has died. She couldn't have been more than 17. Her body is removed from the saloon in the dead of night, with no ceremony, wrapped in a simple blanket and taken to the town's makeshift cemetery on the hill, a place starkly named Boot Hill, for those who died with their boots on. There is no funeral, no moment of silence. The next evening, The piano at the Golden Garter starts up again. It sounds a little more frantic, a little more desperate, as if trying to fill the void Leela left. A new girl, fresh off the stagecoach, has already taken her place on the floor. The gilded cage has a vacancy no more. The system is designed for this kind of turnover. The women are interchangeable parts in a machine that runs on male desire. The academic debate here is a somber one, focusing on demographics and mortality. Historians have tried for years to piece together the life expectancy of these women, but the records are scant and unreliable. Women often used aliases, moved from town to town, or simply disappeared from the historical record altogether. Was Lila's fate the norm, or was it an outlier? Some studies, based on limited census data on cemetery records, suggest the average age of death for a frontier prostitute was shockingly low, perhaps in her early to mid-20s. Others argue that these numbers are skewed, as they don't account for the women who successfully left the life, married, and faded back into respectable society, their pasts carefully erased. We will likely never know the true statistics. You look up at Boot Hill, a collection of simple wooden crosses and unmarked mounds of dirt on the windswept slope. Leela's grave will probably not even get across. She is a ghost now. A cautionary tale whispered among the other girls. A brief interruption in the town's relentless pursuit of wealth and pleasure. Her beauty brought her to this town, and the unseen dangers that came with it have now buried her. You feel a profound sense of sorrow, not just for the girl, but for the brutal calculus of her existence, where her health was just another disposable commodity in a world that had already consumed her youth and her spirit. The death of Leela, as quiet and unceremonious as it was, leaves a subtle stain on the town's mood. It also forces a chilling question into your mind. A question you see reflected in the nervous eyes of the other girls at the Golden Garter. What happens when a woman's beauty fades in this brutal economy of appearance? What is the fate of a soiled dove whose wings are no longer bright? Your value here, as you've learned it, is directly proportional to your desirability. For the women in the saloon, this is a professional, quantifiable fact. Their youth and looks are their primary capital, a finite resource that depreciates with every passing day, every harsh winter, every bout of illness. When a woman's face begins to show the lines of exhaustion, when her figure loses its youthful firmness, or when a lingering illness takes the luster from her hair and skin, her earning potential plummets. She is no longer a frontline attraction. She is moved from the lively main floor to the shadows, from the A team to the B team. You see this hierarchy in action one evening when you risk another quick meal in the saloon's corner. You notice an older woman, perhaps in her late 30s but looking much older, quietly clearing glasses from empty tables. Her dress is less flamboyant than the others, her movement slower. The men barely acknowledge her. She is almost invisible, a ghost of a past glamour. This is one of the most common trajectories, a slow, sad descent down the internal ladder of the establishment, from sought-after prostitute to dance-hall girl, then to a barmaid or a swamper who cleans the floors and spit nests. Her wages drop at each step, while her debt to the house remains, ensuring she can never afford to leave. This was the grim, unromantic reality. The industry had no pension plan, no retirement package. It was, as, in the most literal sense, a dead-end job. A woman was useful as long as she was beautiful, and disposable once she was not. But there were other paths, other fates, each with its own set of risks. This is where you encounter a strange, little-known aspect of the frontier's social fabric, the surprisingly common marriage between aging prostitutes and lonely, older men. Many a solitary rancher, miner, or farmer, after years of isolation, wasn't looking for a pristine young bride. He was looking for a companion, someone who understood the harshness of the world and wouldn't break under the strain of frontier life. An ex-prostitute, for all her social baggage, was often hardy, resilient, and pragmatic. These marriages were often less about romance and more about mutual survival, a partnership of convenience. She gained a home, a measure of security, and a path out of the saloon. He gained a wife, a household manager, and an end to his profound loneliness. you see a potential example of this playing out. A grizzled old prospector, a man who has been a quiet fixture in the town for years, starts spending his evenings at the saloon. But he doesn't drink much or gamble. He just sits at a table and talks to the aging barmaid, the one you noticed before. He brings her a small, lumpy apple from his claim. They speak in low tones, not like a client and a worker, but like two people sharing the weight of their years. The other man speaker, but the two of them seem to exist in a small bubble of quiet understanding. It's a fragile hope, a tiny pinprick of light in a dark world. Of course, not everyone was so lucky. For many, the end was far bleaker. Addiction to laudanum or alcohol, which may have started as a way to cope, often became the final chapter. Unable to work, deep in debt, and ravaged by addiction, many women simply ended up on the street, completely destitute. They became the town's crazy women, figures of pity and scorn, living on the absolute margins of society until they wasted away. And this is where the historical debate becomes particularly poignant and difficult. What percentage of women escaped for a long time? The prevailing narrative was one of inescapable tragedy. Historians assumed that almost all women in the trade met a miserable end. However, more recent, painstaking research, which involves cross-referencing census records, marriage licenses, and property deeds, has started to paint a more complex picture. Researchers have been able to track some of these women, finding that a surprising number did manage to leave the life. They married, moved to a new town where their past was unknown, and became respectable citizens. Some even used the money they'd saved to open their own businesses: a laundry, a boarding house, a small restaurant. These success stories were not the norm, but they were not impossible. They represent a testament to the incredible resilience and strategic thinking of women who were forced to play the worst hand a society could deal them. Watching the old prospector and the tired barmaid, you wonder which path she is on. Is this her chance at a quiet third act, or is it just another fleeting moment of kindness before the inevitable decline? Her faded beauty tells a story of 1,000 nights like this, of fleeting connections and transcational intimacy. The question of what happens next hangs in the smoky air. In a world that worships youth and freshness, she's a living reminder of time's cruel passage. Her fate, like that of so many others, is a gamble, and the house, the unforgiving, patriarchal house of the American West, almost always wins. It's been a few weeks now. The initial shock of your arrival has worn off, replaced by a low-grade, constant vigilance. You've learned to navigate the town, but you haven't learned to be comfortable in it. The simple act of walking down the main street remains a public performance, an ordeal of appraisal. You need to go to the general store to buy thread and a bit of flour, a mundane errand that feels anything but. As you step out of the hotel, you consciously adopt the posture you've seen the few other respectable women in town use: the baker's wife. The banker's wife, head held high, eyes fixed firmly ahead, pace brisk and purposeful. It's a carefully constructed mask of unavailability, a non-verbal sign that says, "I am not here for your entertainment. I am on an errand." Any deviation, a smile, a hesitant step, a glance held a moment too long could be misinterpreted as an invitation. The street is a river of male activity. Cowboys on horseback clatter past, sending up sprays of mud. A group of freighters are noisily loading a wagon, their coursers filling the air. Whiners, they shift over, are trudging towards the saloons, their faces still grey with dust. You are the only person on the street wearing a bonnet. You are a splash of muted colour in a world of brown and denim, and your difference is a magnet for attention. A man leaning against a post tips his hat to you. "Fine day." "None." His voice is polite enough, but his eyes trail you as you walk past. You give a curt, almost imperceptible nod and keep walking. Further down, two younger men, little more than boys, are whittling on a bench. They stop as you approach, their conversation dying. One of them lets out a low whistle, a sound meant to be appreciative but which feels like a physical touch, a violation of your personal space. You feel your cheeks flush with anger and humiliation, but you can't show it. Any reaction: anger, fear. Acknowledgement is a form of engagement. The safest strategy is to pretend you haven't heard, to float above it all. This experience, the gauntlet of the public street, is a key piece of the social history of women in the West. For a lady, her reputation was her most valuable possession, and it was incredibly fragile. It could be tarnished by the slightest perceived misstep, being seen talking to the wrong person, lingering too long in a public place, or even laughing too loudly could start whispers. You are not just a person, you are a symbol of domestic purity, and your every move is judged against that impossible standard. The street is not a neutral space, it is a stage where your virtue is constantly being performed and assessed by a male audience. As you near the general store, you encounter a strange and slightly comical sight that speaks volumes about the town's social codes. The banker's wife is coming out of the store, a basket on her arm. The town sheriff, a big man with a drooping mustache, happens to be walking by. He sees her and immediately performs a series of awkward but deeply respectful gestures. He stops, removes his hat, holds it over his heart, and takes a half step off the wooden boardwalk into the mud to allow her to pass. Even though the boardwalk is more than wide enough for both of them, he doesn't speak to her, he just performs this elaborate ritual of deference. Here's a little-known tidbit about frontier etiquette: this exaggerated display of chivalry was not just about politeness. It was a public performance of social distinction. By showing such profound respect to the banker's wife, the sheriff was reinforcing the social hierarchy. He was publicly signaling that she was a good woman, an untouchable lady, completely distinct from the public women of the saloons. It was a way for the men in power to categorize and control the female population, drawing a thick, visible line between the women you married and the women you used. Your own journey down the street is a constant process of being unofficially categorized. Every man you pass is mentally placing you on one side of that line or the other. You finally reach the sanctuary of the general store. Inside, the storekeeper is serving a quiet, dusty farmer. They both nod to you respectfully. Here, in the context of commerce, your presence is slightly more normalized. But even as you wait your turn, you are aware of the farmer's furtive glances. He isn't being aggressive, he seems almost shy, but he is still looking. Their gaze is a constant. The historical debate around this issue of public space is fascinating. Some feminist historians argue that this constant scrutiny and the rigid behavioral codes effectively placed respectable women under a form of house arrest. Their freedom of movement was severely restricted, not by laws, but by the threat of social ruin and harassment. Their world was confined to the home, the church, and a few safe commercial establishments. Other historians suggest this view is slightly overstated, pointing to women's diaries and letters that show them actively creating their own social spaces, sewing circles, church groups, community potlucks where they could operate with more freedom. They argue that women were not just passive victims of this public judgment, but active agents in building their own parallel society. As you leave the store, catching your small parcel, you decide to take a back alley to avoid the main street on your return trip. It's a longer, smellier route, past the rear of the saloon with its pile of empty bottles, but it's a relief to be out of the direct line of sight. This small act of avoidance is a victory. You have successfully purchased thread. It's a trivial achievement, but it feels like you've just completed a dangerous covert operation. You've navigated the public trial of the main street and returned to your base unscathed, and you realize, with a heavy heart, that this is what your life will be: a series of strategic retreats and evasive maneuvers, all just to maintain a fragile semblance of privacy and peace in a world that refuses to let you be anonymous. The town decides to hold a social, a rare event designed to bring the respectable folk together and offer a pale imitation of the civilized life they left behind. It's to be held in the newly constructed town hall, which is really just a large, that adorned wooden barn. The news spreads quickly, and for the first time, You feel a flicker of something other than anxiety or cautious optimism. A dance. It sounds normal. It sounds like a chance to interact with people in a structured, safe environment. A world away from the predatory chaos of the saloon. You spend the afternoon preparing. You press your best dress, a simple dark blue cotton, and spend an inordinate amount of time arranging your hair. Looking in the mirror, you see a hopeful young woman. Someone who could almost believe she is just attending a simple community gathering back home. This hope, you will soon learn, is a dangerous thing. When you arrive at the town hall with the banker and his wife, who graciously offered to escort you, the scene is almost charming. The rough-hewn hall is decorated with hand-made paper flowers unilluminated by dozens of lanterns, casting a warm, flickering glow. A makeshift band, consisting of a fiddle, a banjo, and a wheezing concertina, is tuning up in a corner. The handful of other respectable women are huddled together, creating a small island of femininity in a vast sea of eager-looking men. The men have all made a clear effort. They are clean-shaven. Their hair is slicked down with water or grease, and they've donned their least worn shirts. The first few dances are polite and orderly. Men line up to formally ask the ladies for a turn on the floor. You dance with the elderly town judge, the shy storekeeper, and the banker. Their conversations are stilted and awkward, mostly about the weather and the price of lumber. But it's a relief. It feels managed, safe. Then, a new man approaches you. He is handsome, in a rugged sort of way. A cattleman named Jed you've seen around town. He has a confident swagger that sets him apart from the more awkward farmers and miners. He asks you to dance, and you accept. He is a good dancer, and for a few minutes, you actually relax, caught up in the simple joy of the music and movement. But as the fiddle tune ends, another man immediately steps forward. His name is Blackwood, a surveyor with a reputation for a quick temper and a heavy hand. My turn, he says. Not to you, but to Jed. It's not a request. It's a challenge. Jed's easy smile tightens. The lady has said yes. She will, Blackwood says, his eyes fixed on you. His gaze is possessive, as if you are a piece of property being disputed. This is the moment the fragile illusion of civility shatters. You are no longer a dance partner. You are a prize. The central historical tension of the frontier is playing out right here on this dusty dance floor. The clash between the imported rules of civilized society and the raw, violent code of male competition. The dance was supposed to be a safe space, but it has only concentrated the town's core problem: too many men, not enough women into one hot, tense room. You try to defuse the situation. Thank you both, but I'm feeling a little tired. I think you'll sit down for a moment. You try to step away, but Blackwood moves to block your path. Don't you want to dance with me, he asks. And there's a menacing edge to his voice now. The men around you are no longer smiling. The music has faltered. Everyone is watching. Jed steps between you and Blackwood. You heard the lady, just eyed. He doesn't raise his voice, but it's firm. There goes. The two men are now squared off, standing inches apart. The air crackles with unspoken violence. A fist fight, or worse, is moments away, and you are the explicit cause. Your heart pounds in your throat. This is the danger of being too pretty in its purest form. Your desirability, in a hyper-competitive environment, acts as a spark in a powder keg. Here's a curious, little-known detail about frontier social violence: duels weren't always fought with pistols at dawn. More often, they were sudden, brutal, and informal brawls. However, there was often a strange, unwritten etiquette to them. A fair fight was one-on-one, with no weapons other than fists. The community would often form a circle and let the two men settle their dispute, with the winner claiming not just victory, but a kind of social dominance. The fight between Jed and Blackwood wouldn't just be about you, it would be about establishing their place in the town's pecking order. Thankfully, Before a punch can be thrown, the sheriff pushes his way through the crowd. All right, that's enough. Both of you. Take it outside or go home. His presence is just enough to break the spell. Blackwood gives you one last, lingering look. A look that promises this isn't over. Before turning and stalking out of the hall, Jed turns to you, his face flushed. Apologies. No. That shouldn't have happened. The party is ruined. The warm, festive atmosphere has evaporated, replaced by a thick, awkward tension. The banker's wife quickly materializes at your side and suggests it's time to leave. As you walk out into the cool night, you can't stop trembling. The academic debate here centers on the concept of honor in masculine frontier culture. Was this aggressive possessiveness a product of a society that viewed women as chattel? Pure and simple, or was it, as some social historians argue, a more complex performance of masculinity in a world where traditional markers of status, land, inherited wealth, family name were less important? A man's reputation, or honor, was everything. By defending or claiming a woman, men were publicly demonstrating their strength and virility. Key components of their honor. According to this view, the conflict wasn't really about you as a person. You were simply the symbol over which their status battle was being waged. That academic distinction feels meaningless to you now. Whether you were seen as property or as a symbol, the result was the same. You were the lightning rod for a storm of male aggression. The dance, which you hoped would be a refuge, was just a more decorated arena for the same dangerous game. You came seeking community and found yourself the cause of a near brawl, trapped between two proud, volatile men. And you know, with a dreadful certainty, that this is only the beginning. The incident at the dance casts a long shadow. Blackwood, the surveyor, now seems to be everywhere you are. If you go to the general store, H.E. is there, leaning against the counter, watching you. If you take your short, prescribed walk to the edge of town, you see him in the distance, ostensibly checking survey lines, but always positioned where he can see you. He never approaches you directly, not after the public showdown at the dance. Instead, he engages in a campaign of quiet, unnerving persistence. He leaves a small, wilting wildflower on the doorstep of the hotel. He sends a message with a young boy, asking if you require any protection. His attention is like a constant, low hum of anxiety in your life. It's not overtly threatening, but it's suffocating. You have made it clear you're not interested. You refused his dance. You ignore his presence. You throw away his flower, but your refusal means nothing to him. In his mind, your no is not a boundary, it's a challenge. A part of a courtship script that he believes will ultimately end in his victory. He is, in the parlance at the time, a persistent suitor. But his persistence feels less like romance and more like a siege. You consider speaking to the sheriff. This is, after all, harassment. But what can you possibly tell him that a man is looking at you, that he left you a flower in a town where drunken brawls are a nightly occurrence and cattle rustling is a capital offense? Your complaint would be met with a confused stare, or worse, amusement. This is a core historical reality for women of the era. There were no legal frameworks to protect them from this kind of psychological stalking. The law was designed to address clear physical transgressions, theft, assault, murder. It was utterly unequipped to handle the grey, murky area of unwanted attention. A man had the right to court a woman, and his persistence was often seen as a sign of his ardent affection, not as a form of intimidation. This is where you feel the full weight of your isolation. Back home, you would have a network of protection. Your father or brothers would have a quiet word with a man like Blackwood. Your mother and aunts would surround you. Their collective social disapproval a powerful shield. Here, you have no one. You are untethered from the family and community structures that normally guard a woman's reputation and safety. Frustrated and scared, you seek the advice of the only other respectable woman you have any real acquaintance with, the banker's wife. You find her in her parlor, a small oasis of eastern civility, with lace doilies and a real piano. You explain the situation in hushed, nervous tones. She listens patiently, her hands busy with her needlepoint. Her response is not what you expect. Mr. Blackwood is a man of some ambition, she says calmly. He is looking for a wife to solidify his position in this town. Your beauty and your respectable manner make you a desirable candidate. She says it as if she's discussing a business merger. But I have refused him. You insist. I don't want his attention. She sighs, putting down her needlework. My dear, what you want is a luxury this place does not afford. What you must consider is what is prudent. Mr. Blackwood is becoming a problem. The only way to solve a problem like Mr. Blackwood is to be claimed by another, or to relent to him. The brutal calculus of her advice hangs in the air. Your safety is not about your consent, it's about being the property of the right man. This brings up a strange and little-known aspect of frontier's social dynamics, the phantom fiancé. Some women, toward often wanted suitors, would invent a fiancé back east who was coming out on the next train. It was a clever social lie, creating a placeholder protector who wasn't there to be challenged to a fight. It bought them time and space, a brief respite from the constant pressure, but it was a temporary solution, a bluff that could be called at any time. The historical debate here revolves around female agency in the face of such pervasive harassment. Were women like you completely powerless, forced to choose between a set of equally unappealing male protectors, or did they develop subtle, sophisticated strategies of resistance? Some historians argue that women became expert social diplomats, skillfully playing suitors against one another, using gossip as a tool to damage a persistent man's reputation, and leveraging the community's own codes of honor to their advantage. For instance, a woman might loudly and publicly praise a gentlemanly suitor like Jed to shame a more aggressive one like Blackwood. This interpretation suggests a more active, though still constrained, role for women in managing their own social survival. But as you sit in that stuffy parlor, you don't feel like a diplomat. You feel like a pawn. The banker's wife's advice, meant to be helpful and pragmatic, only reinforces your sense of helplessness. The system is rigged. The law is silent. The social codes are written by and for men like Blackwood. You leave her house feeling more alone than ever. The pressure is mounting. Blackwood's silent, watchful presence is a constant reminder of your vulnerability. You are a ship in a storm, and every man in town is offering you a safe harbor, but on his own terms. The idea of inventing a fiancé crosses your mind, but who would believe you, and how long could you maintain the lie? The problem with a man who won't take no for an answer is that the word no ceases to be part of your vocabulary. You are left only with choices made by others, a life dictated by the stubborn, obsessive desires of a man you desperately wish would just leave you alone. The situation with Blackwood escalates in a small but significant way. You've taken to buying your bread from the baker's wife early in the morning to avoid the main street. One morning, as you're walking back through the alley, Blackwood is there, waiting for you. H.E.S. not threatening. Not exactly. He simply blocks your path, holding a single, scraggly prairie flower. "Good morning, miss," he says, his voice attempting a gentleness that doesn't sit right. "I thought you might like this." Your heart freezes. The alley, which you'd chosen for its privacy, now feels like a trap. There's no one else around. "Please let me pass," you say, your voice trembling slightly. "Not until you take my flower," he insists. A stubborn set to his jaw. It's a gift. It ain't polite to refuse a gift. This is the logic of a world that views you not as a person, but as a territory to be conquered. Your refusal is not a statement of your, it's an obstacle to be overcome. In that moment, you understand a terrifying aspect of the frontier mindset, a concept that is central to the history of the American West, the idea of unclaimed things being available for the taking. This principle was most famously applied to land. The Homestead Act of 1862 was built on the premise that vast swaths of the West were unclaimed and therefore free for settlers to claim and cultivate. This, of course, completely ignored the fact that this land was the ancestral home of Native American tribes. From a legal and cultural standpoint of the white settlers, if land wasn't fenced, platted, unregistered with a deed, it was essentially empty and up for grabs. This same brutal logic was often applied, informally and subconsciously, to women. A woman who was not under the clear, legal protection of a father or a husband was, in the eyes of many men, unclaimed territory, like a pristine valley or a vein of gold. She was a resource waiting to be possessed. Your beauty makes you a particularly rich and desirable plot of land. Blackwood isn't just courting you, he's trying to stake his claim. His persistence is his way of fencing you in, of marking you as his own in the eyes of the community. You stand there for a long moment, the stale alley air thick with tension. Then, a voice cuts through it. She doesn't want your weed, Blackwood. It's Jed, the handsome cattleman from the docks. He steps out from behind a stack of barrels, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. No, back away and let the lady pass. Blackwood stiffens, his hand dropping the flower. This is private business. Jed, between me and the miss. Doesn't look that way to me, Jed says, taking a slow step forward. Looks to me like you're bothering someone who wants to be left alone. The confrontation is a stark, living illustration of the claim jumping mentality. In mining, claim jumping trying to steal another man's staked out piece of land was a serious offense, often leading to lethal violence. Here, in this alley, Jed is accusing Blackwood of jumping his implied claim. Even though Jed has no formal right to you, he is defending you not purely out of chivalry, but because he sees you as being within his sphere of interest. The conflict is between the two men. You are simply the territory they are fighting over. Here's a bizarre, little-known legal fact that highlights how blurred these lines were in some parts of the West. There existed the concept of breach of promise suits. If a man promised to marry a woman and then backed out, she could sue him for damages. This was one of the few legal tools a woman had. However, these suits were often twisted. A man could perceive another's courtship of his intended as a form of theft, a theft of future domestic labor and companionship. The law treated the promise of marriage almost like a property contract. Blackwood, unwilling to have a public confrontation he might lose, glares at Jed, then at you. He mutters a curse, turns, and storms away. You're left standing in the alley, shaking, with Jed. Thank you, you say, your voice barely a whisper. A man like that only understands one thing, Jed says, kicking at the dirt. You need to be careful. A woman on her own out here. It's not easy. He doesn't say it with malice, but with a kind of weary resignation. He too sees your solitary status as the core of the problem. The academic debate surrounding this topic is contentious. Traditional histories of the West often romanticize this male competition as part of the rugged, individualistic spirit of the frontier. They frame it as a noble contest for a lady's hand. More critical historians, particularly those focused on gender studies, reframe it in much starker terms. They argue that this was a culture of ownership, where women were objectified to such an extent that their own consent was a secondary concern. The primary social contract was between men, and it was about respecting each other's property, including wives, daughters, and even potential fiancées. Your encounter in the alley wasn't a romance, it was a property dispute. You walk back to the hotel, Jed escorting you at a respectful distance. You feel a strained, conflicted sense of gratitude. He saved you from Blackwood, but his very presence reinforces the idea that your only safety lies in the protection of a man. You are not a citizen with rights, you are a territory that must be owned to be safe. And as you glance back at Jed, a strong, capable figure, a terrifying thought enters your mind. What if the only way to be safe from the wolves is to choose one of them to be your keeper? The pressure is becoming unbearable. Blackwood's menacing watchfulness, Jed's well-intentioned but proprietary protection. You are caught between two forces. both of which seek to control your fate. The feeling of being on claimed territory haunts you. The banker's wife's pragmatic, chilling advice echoes in your ears. It seems every path available to you in this town leads to a loss of your own agency. You need a way out, not just from the unwanted attention, but from the town itself. It's during a quiet, lonely evening in your hotel room that you find a possible, desperate alternative. The hotel proprietor, in a moment of kindness, has left you a stack of old newspapers from back east to help pass the time. You read them hungrily, devouring news of a world that feels a million miles away. And then you see them, the advertisements, tucked away in the back pages, between ads for farm equipment and patent medicines, are the small, discreet notices. WINTEDWIFE. A man of good standing with a 160-acre homestead seeks a respectable woman of good character for the purpose of matrimony. Object a happy home. FARMBR. 42. Owning his own land and livestock. Desires correspondence with a lady of sober and industrious habits. Photograph requested. Hello NEOYMINER. Having struck a modest claim, wishes to share his fortune with an honest woman who is not afraid of hard work and simple living. These are the siren songs of the mail-order bride phenomenon. This is a widely known, yet often romanticized, part of Western history for thousands of lonely men on the frontier, men who lived in places even more isolated than this town. Advertising for a wife was the only practical way to find a partner, and for thousands of women in the East, women facing poverty, spinsterhood, or simply a lack of opportunity, answering such an ad was a gamble, a risky but potentially life-altering leap of faith. It was a transcational arrangement, born of mutual desperation, but cloaked in the language of romantic hope. You read the letters over and over. The words paint a picture of a different kind of life. A happy home, his own land, a shared fortune. It's a stark contrast to your current situation, where you are a public spectacle, a prize to be fought over. The idea of being a partner, a co-builder of a home on a private piece of land, feels like an incredible relief. It offers the promise of belonging, of being claimed not by force, but by contract, by mutual agreement. You begin to study the ads with a new, more serious eye. It's like shopping for a future. You dismiss the ones that sound too desperate or too demanding. You're drawn to one in particular. It's from a man in the Oregon Territory, a place you've heard is green and lush, a world away from this dusty, brown landscape. He describes himself as a widower with a small but prosperous farm, seeking a companion to share his quiet life. He writes not of fortune, but of mutual respect and gentle company. His words seem different from the others. They seem kind. He is a curious. Little-known fact about this process: the women who answered these ads were not all desperate, destitute waifs. While many were, a surprising number were women of some education and means, like teachers or clerks, who were simply tired of the restrictive social codes of the East. They were adventurers in their own right, choosing the risk of the unknown over the certainty of a constrained life. They were, in a sense, gambling on themselves, betting that their own resilience and character could forge a good life with a stranger. But even as a flicker of hope ignites within you, you know the immense risk. You are basing the most important decision of your life on a few lines of text in a newspaper. This man could be anyone. He could be kind and gentle, as his words suggest. Or he could be a brute, a drunkard, a tyrant who is simply a better writer than Blackwood. The newspaper ad is a fantasy, a carefully constructed piece of marketing. You have no way of knowing the reality that lies behind it. The mail-order bride system was the ultimate blind date. A lottery where the tickets were expensive, your entire future and the prizes and punishments were equally extreme. The historical debate around the mail-order bride phenomenon is split. Early accounts, often sensationalized, focused on the horror stories women lured into abusive situations, treated like domestic slaves, or even murdered by the men who had promised them a paradise. This view paints the system as a predatory trap. However, more recent historical research, using personal letters and diaries, has shown that a significant number of these unions were surprisingly successful. Many couples, brought together by pragmatism and a shared desire for companionship, managed to build stable, affectionate, and lasting relationships. They found not passionate love, perhaps, but a deep and abiding partnership. The system wasn't inherently good or evil, it was a high-stakes gamble with a wide range of outcomes. Use it by the flickering lamplight. The newspaper spread out before you. The ad from the Oregon farmer seems to glow on the page. It represents a potential escape route, a door out of your current prison. But what lies on the other side of that door? A quiet life of mutual respect, or a more isolated, more terrifying cage? You would be trading a known danger for an unknown one. With a trembling hand, you take out a piece of paper and a pen. You begin to compose a letter. A careful, guarded response to the man in Oregon. You choose your words as if your life depends on them. Because you know, in a very real sense, that it does. Every word is a step into the fall. A bet against the terrible odds of the frontier. This letter is not just a letter. It is a ticket, and you have no idea if it's for a journey to heaven or to hell. Your letter is sent, and then you wait. The weeks that follow are a strange limbo. You live your carefully circumscribed life in the town, avoiding Blackwood, politely deflecting Jed, all while a secret part of your mind is hundreds of miles away in Oregon. Every time the stagecoach arrives, your heart leaps into your throat. You watch the postmaster sort the mail with an intensity that is almost painful. Finally, a letter arrives. The handwriting is neat and steady. The return address is a place you've never heard of: Willamette Valley, Oregon. Your hands shake as you open it. The man's name is Arthur. He writes simply, indirectly. He thanks you for your letter, answers your questions plainly, and includes a small, faded photograph. It shows a man in his 40s with kind eyes, a slightly shy smile, and work-roughened hands. He is not handsome like Jed or imposing like Blackwood. He looks solid, dependable. He writes about his farm, the apple orchard he planted, the view of the mountains from his porch. He asks about you, about your hopes for a new life. He includes the funds for your journey. The letter is a lifeline. The photograph gives a face to the dream. The money makes it real. The decision, which had felt so abstract, is now a concrete choice. Stay here, in this town of predatory gazes and looming threats, or take this incredible, terrifying leap into the complete unknown. You choose the unknown. The journey west is an epic undertaking in itself, a historical experience that tested the limits of human endurance. It's not a simple train ride. It's a grueling, multi-stage marathon. You start on a train, rattling for days across the plains. The carriage is crowded and uncomfortable, filled with families, hopeful prospectors, and other single women whose faces hold the same mixture of hope and fear as your own. You watch the landscape change from the familiar greens of the east to the vast, empty browns of the plains, then to the staggering, brutal beauty of the Rocky Mountains. At the end of the railway line, the journey continues by stagecoach. If the train was uncomfortable, the stagecoach is an instrument of torture. You are crammed into a small, stifling box with 8 other passengers, knees touching, sharing the same stale air. The coach sways and lurches violently over rough, unmountained roads. There are no rest stops, no amenities. You sleep sitting up, your head lolling with the motion of the coach. You eat hard biscuits and jerky, and drink gritty, lukewarm water from a communal bowl. This is a part of the mail-order bride story that is often glossed over: the sheer physical and mental toll of the journey itself. A woman would arrive at her destination not as a fresh, blushing bride, but as an exhausted, travel-worn survivor. The trip was a crucible, stripping away any romantic notions and replacing them with a hard-won grit. Along the way, you witness a small, Strange detail of westward travel the road ranches. These were not ranches in the traditional sense, but crude, privately owned rest stops that popped up along major stagecoach routes. They were often just a sod hut or a simple cabin offering a vile-tasting meal, a bed full of bugs, and watered-down whiskey for an exorbitant price. They were notorious for their filth and their unscrupulous owners. But for a traveler who hadn't slept horizontally in a week, they were a desperate, necessary evil. You spend one miserable night in such a place, sleeping on a straw pallet that smells of mildew, listening to the snores and coughs of a dozen strangers in the same room. As the journey wears on, the landscape changes again. The dust and rock of the high desert give way to towering forests of pine and fir. The air grows cooler, smelling of damp earth and greenery. You are in Oregon. The beauty is breathtaking, but it's a wild, untamed beauty. The forests are dark and dense. The mountains loom like silent giants. It's a different kind of isolation from the open plains. This is an enclosing, whispering isolation. The academic debate here focuses on the psychological impact of this journey. Did the shared hardship of the trail create a sense of solidarity among female travelers, or did the brutal conditions foster a survival of the fittest mentality? Pitting them against each other for scarce resources, some diaries and letters describe deep friendships forged on the trail, with women sharing food, mending each other's clothes, and providing emotional support. Others recount bitter rivalries and mistrust. The experience was likely a deeply personal one, shaped by the specific personalities and circumstances of each group of travelers. You find yourself in a quiet alliance with another woman, a German girl named Ilk, who is also meeting a husband she's never seen. You don't speak much, but you share a water flask and watch each other's bags, a small, unspoken pact in a world of strangers. Finally, after what feels like a lifetime, the stagecoach rumbles to a halt in a small, muddy town that is your final destination. The driver calls your name. You step out, your legs unsteady, your clothes rumpled and stained with the dust of 1,000 miles. You are here. You look around at the small collection of wooden buildings, at the faces of the strangers watching the stagecoach arrive. Which one is he, which one is Arthur? The hope and fear that have been your constant companions for weeks now coalesce into a single, heart-stopping moment of truth. Your new life is about to begin, and you have no idea what it will look like. A man steps forward from the small crowd gathered around the stagecoach. H.E.S. older than his photograph suggested, the lines around his eyes and mouth etched deeper by sun and worry. H.E.S. holding his hat in his hands, twisting the brim nervously. It's Arthur. He stops a few feet away from you, his gaze taking in your travel-worn appearance. You, in turn, are taking in the reality of him. The kind eyes from the photograph are there, but they're filled with a weariness you couldn't see on paper. H.E.S. thinner than you imagined, and he carries himself with a slight stoop. The posture of a man who spends his days bent over the earth. The romantic, respectable farmer from the letters looks, in the flesh, like a man who has been beaten down by this beautiful, unforgiving land. Miss, he begins, his voice raspy and uncertain. He has forgotten your name, or perhaps H.E.S. too nervous to say it. You provide it for him, your own voice sounding small and foreign. Arthur, he says, as if to remind himself. Welcome, it's good of you to come. The carefully composed sentences from his letters have vanished, replaced by a clumsy, awkward sincerity. This is the moment of reckoning. The pivotal scene in the mail order bride drama where fantasy collides with reality. The person you've built up in your mind, the partner in mutual respect and gentle company, is a stranger. And you, the respectable woman of good character from your own letters, are an equally unknown quantity to him. The person as you both created on paper now have to contend with the complex, flawed, and tired human being standing in the mud. This first meeting was a moment of immense psychological weight. For many couples, it was a make or break point. All the hopes and fears of the preceding months were focused on this single interaction. It's a historical fact that some women took one look at their intended husband, turned around, and tried to get back on the same stagecoach they arrived on, destination unknown, and some men, seeing a woman who didn't match their expectations, quietly slipped back into the crowd, leaving her stranded and alone. Arthur seems to sense your shock, your disappointment. The farm is a ways out of town, he says quickly, eager to move. My wagon is over here. He gestures to a simple, sturdy farm wagon pulled by a single, tired-looking mule. He loads your small trunk onto the back with an efficiency that speaks of long practice, then helps you up onto the hard wooden seat. The gesture is courteous, but his hand is rough and calloused, a farmer's hand. As the wagon creaks out of town, the silence between you is heavy and profound. What can you possibly say to each other? You try to ask about the town, and he gives one-word answers. He asks if your journey was hard, and you say yes. There is a flowing correspondence that connected you across a continent has dried up in person. The shared dream has given way to a shared, awkward reality. You notice details you couldn't have known from his letters. His clothes are clean but patched in several places. There's a faint, earthy smell about him, of soil and sweat and livestock. He does mock at you as you speak, keeping his eyes fixed on the muddy track ahead. Is he shy or is he disappointed? Is he regretting this entire arrangement? You can't tell. Here's a small, poignant detail from the letters of mail-order brides many women wrote about the shock of their future husband's hands. And there is, a man's hands could signify his social class. Soft hands meant a gentleman, a clerk, a professional. The rough, careless, often dirty hands of a frontier farmer were a physical manifestation of a life of hard manual labor that many women were completely unprepared for. It was a tangible sign of the class and cultural gap they had just crossed. The academic debate here is focused on expectations versus reality. Historians who study these letters note that both men and women engaged in a certain amount of false advertising. Men often exaggerated the size and prosperity of their farms. Women might embellish their domestic skills or present a more youthful, flattering photograph. Was this deliberate, malicious deception, or was it a more innocent form of hopefulness? A desire to present the best possible version of oneself to attract a partner. Some scholars argue it was a necessary fiction, a social lubricant to initiate a transaction that was, at its core, deeply awkward and unnatural. Both parties were selling themselves, and in any sale, a little bit of puffery is to be expected. As the wagon jostles along, you look at Arthur's profile. This is the man you have entrusted your entire future to. The romantic image you held on to during the long journey, the prosperous widower in his neat farmhouse, is dissolving before your eyes, replaced by this silent, weary man and his sad-looking mule. He is not a villain. He is not a brute. He is simply real. And the reality is far more intimidating than any fantasy. The hope that sustained you for so long is now flickering, threatening to go out. The gilded cage of the last town was a known prison. This, you realize with a sinking heart, is an unknown one. You have gambled everything on a stranger's words, and you are just now beginning to understand the stakes. The song, which he promised was a place of quiet life, might just be a place of quiet desperation, and you have willingly, hopefully, walked right into it. The wagon ride seems to last for hours. The track becomes rougher, the forest closing in around you, so dense and tall that the afternoon sun only penetrates in shifting, dappled patches. The silence in the wagon remains unbroken, a heavy blanket of unspoken questions and disappointments. Arthur's focus is entirely on navigating the treacherous path, his hands expertly guiding the mule around rocks and deep ruts. His silence is not aggressive, but it's absolute. It's the silence of a man long accustomed to being alone. A man who has perhaps forgotten how to share his world with another person. Finally, he pulls the mule to a halt in a small clearing. "We're here," he says. You look around, and the last, flickering embers of the dream you carried across the country are extinguished. This is not a farm. It's a wound carved into the wilderness, A handful of acres have been cleared of the towering trees, their massive stumps dotting the landscape like ancient gravestones. In the center of this clearing sits a small, rough-hewn log cabin. It is tiny, windowless on one side, with a single door and a chimney made of mud and sticks. This is the happy home. To one side, a small patch of tilled earth holds a few rows of struggling vegetables, and the apple orchard he wrote of with such pride is a collection of about a dozen spindly saplings, looking fragile and out of place against the backdrop of the immense, ancient forest. This is the stark reality of homesteading, a fundamental truth of the American West that was stripped of all its romanticism. It was a life of grueling, relentless labor and profound isolation. A man like Arthur would have spent years just clearing this small patch of land, felling giant trees with nothing but an axe and a saw. His life was a battle against nature, fought from sunup to sundown, with no holidays, no sick days, and no neighbors to call on for help. The nearest homestead might be 5 or 10 miles away, an impossible distance to travel for a casual visit. Arthur helps you down from the wagon, his touch brief and functional. He leads you to the cabin. The inside is even more Spartan than you could have imagined. It's a single room. A rough plank table and 2 stools stand in the center. A stone fireplace for cooking and heat dominates one wall. In the corner is a bed, a simple wooden frame with a straw-stuffed mattress. A few shelves hold a handful of tin plates and a cast iron pot. There are no curtains, no pictures, no books. There is no trace of a woman's touch, no evidence of the first wife he mentioned in his letters. There is only the bare, stark evidence of survival. The well is out back, he says, pointing. The privy is past the trees there. They'll bring your trunk in. And with that, he turns and goes back outside, leaving you alone in your new home. You stand in the middle of the room, a profound sense of despair washing over you. The beauty of the landscape, which had seemed so majestic from a distance, now feels oppressive. The towering trees of the forest are not a picturesque backdrop, they are a wall, cutting you off from the rest of the world. The silence is no longer peaceful, it's a living entity, a vast, humming emptiness that presses in on your ears. This brings you to a terrifying, little-known phenomenon of frontier life, the psychological toll of the landscape itself. On the Great Plains, it was sometimes called prairie madness, a mental breakdown attributed to the crushing isolation and the vast, featureless horizon. Here, in the dense forests of Oregon, it has a different quality. It's a form of claustrophobia, a feeling of being swallowed by the endless, whispering green, the constant rustle of leaves, the cry of an unseen bird, the snap of a twig in the woods. Every sound is amplified by the profound silence, making you feel perpetually watched by an unseen, indifferent nature. The days that follow fall into a monotonous, soul-crushing routine. Arthur rises before dawn and works until after dusk. He is not unkind to you, but he is barely present. He speaks only when necessary, to give you instructions about the chores he expects you to handle: tending the garden, cooking the mega meals, mending his clothes, pulling water from the well. You are not partners. You are 2 strangers sharing a tiny cabin, your lives running on parallel tracks that never intersect. The gentle company he promised is this deafening silence. This is a subject of ongoing debate among historians of the domestic West. What was the true nature of these mail-order marriages? Were they pragmatic partnerships, where affection and communication were considered luxuries, secondary to the shared work of survival? In this view, Arthur's silence isn't neglect, it's the quiet focus of a man straining to keep you both alive. Or, as other historians argue, was this emotional desolation a form of abuse in itself? Did men like Arthur, seeking a wife, actually just want a domestic servant? A helpmate in the most literal and dehumanizing sense of the word for the woman, trapped miles from anyone, with no resources and no way to leave. Such profound loneliness could be as damaging as any physical cruelty. One evening, you stand at the open door of the cabin, watching the sun set behind the distant, jagged mountains. The sky is a breathtaking spectacle of orange, pink, and purple. It is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. and you have never felt so completely, utterly trapped. The stunning, majestic beauty of your prison doesn't make it any less of a prison. In fact, it makes it worse. It's a constant, mocking reminder of the grand, wild world that exists just outside your cage, a world you can see but can never, ever reach. The weeks bleed into a month, and the silence of the cabin becomes your most constant companion. Arthur remains a distant figure, a creature of routine and hard labor. You perform your duties, keep the cabin as clean as possible, and try to make the meager meals palatable. You are not a wife, you are a housekeeper who shares a bed with her employer. The loneliness is a physical ache, a heavy weight in your chest. The beautiful, formidable landscape has become your jailer. You begin to notice the subtle ways the isolation is changing you. You talk to yourself, just to hear a human voice. You give names to the chickens. You find yourself watching a line of ants march across the floor with intense, focused interest. Your world has shrunk to the size of this clearing, and your mind, desperate for stimulation, latches onto the smallest of details. One day, while mending one of Arthur's shirts, you find a small, loose thread in the lining of your own travel trunk. You pull at it, and a small section of the fabric lining comes away. Tucked behind it is a small, folded piece of paper you don't remember putting there. You unfold it. It's a note, written in a delicate, feminine hand. If you need help, it reads, "Follow the creek downstream at dawn. Look for the blue calico tied to the elderberry bush. We are here." The note is from Elke, the German girl from the stagecoach. You remember her telling you her new home was somewhere in the same valley. In a moment of shared, unspoken fear before you parted ways, you must have exchanged a glance. A touch, a silent promise that led her to slip this note into your trunk. It is a secret, a lifeline, a whisper of hope in the overwhelming silence. This clandestine communication network is one of the most fascinating and underdocumented aspects of women's lives on the frontier. This is a historical reality that often escapes the grand narratives of male conquest. In a world where they were isolated and often powerless, women built their own systems of support. They passed messages through trusted merchants or sympathetic stagecoach drivers. They developed codes, like a particular cold pattern hung out to air on a clothesline, which could signal distress, a new baby, or a need for help. A specific knot in a rope, a certain flower planted by the gate. These were the quiet, ingenious ways that women spoke to each other across miles of isolating wilderness. They created a social telegraph that was invisible to their husbands and the male-dominated world around them. The note from Elke changes everything. The world, which had felt so empty, now contains a secret geography of escape. The creek, which was just a source of water, is now a potential path. The elderberry bush is a landmark. The landscape is no longer just a prison, it contains a map. The thought of escape is both thrilling and terrifying. Where would you go and what would you do? You have no money, no resources. Leaving Arthur would mean throwing yourself into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on your back. But the note is not just about escape. It's about connection. It's the knowledge that you are not entirely alone. Another woman is out there, living a parallel life, and she has reached out to you. You start to think strategically. You save a small portion of your food ration each day, a handful of dried beans, a piece of hard biscuit, and hide it in a small cloth bag at the bottom of your trunk. You begin to pay more attention to Arthur's routines, to the weather, to the phases of the moon. You are no longer a passive victim of your circumstances. You are a planner, an operative in the secret war against your own despair. The existence and extent of these female support networks is a topic of lively academic debate. Some historians argue that they were rare and largely ineffective, given the immense physical distances and the patriarchal control that governed most women's lives. They contend that the romantic idea of a widespread sisterhood of the plains is an exaggeration. Other scholars, however, argue that these networks were crucial for survival, not just physically but psychologically, citing women's diaries that speak of treasured letters, shared recipes, and passed along children's clothing. They argue that these connections, however tenuous, were the glue that held women's sanity together. The act of receiving a message like Elk's was a powerful affirmation that your individual struggle was part of a shared female experience. One evening, Arthur comes in from the fields later than usual. He is exhausted, covered in mud, and in a foul mood. A piece of his equipment has broken, and he slams his hand down on the table in frustration. "Damn this land," he mutters, a rare outburst of emotion. In that moment, you see him not as your jailer, but as a fellow prisoner. He is just as trapped by this life as you are. His dream of a prosperous farm has soured into the same reality of back-breaking labor and loneliness that defines your own existence. He is not a monster, he is a man drowning in the same silence that suffocates you. This realization doesn't make you want to stay. It clarifies your need to leave. You were brought here to solve his loneliness, but you have only ended up sharing it. You are two people trapped in a single, desperate dream. But now, you have a secret. You have a map. You have the promise of a blue calatai to a bush. And for the first time since you arrived in this beautiful, terrible place, you have a choice that is entirely your own. The whispers of a potential escape are growing louder than the silence of your cabin. While you are trapped in your own quiet prison in the Oregon wilderness, your mind often drifts back to the first town, to the hierarchies you witnessed there. You think of the soiled doves in the saloon, of the hard line drawn between them and the respectable women, but you now realize there was another, even more brutal, hierarchy at play, one based not just on reputation, but on race. Your beauty, as a white woman, brought you a specific set of dangers. But for a woman of color, her beauty was compounded by a racialized peril that was far more systemic and inescapable. This is a crucial and often overlooked truth of the American West. The landscape was not just populated by white settlers and wild Indians. It was a complex mosaic of cultures, Mexican families who had lived on the land for generations before it became U.S. territory, Native American tribes with their own ancient and sophisticated societies, and, increasingly, Chinese laborers and African-American exodusters seeking a new life after the Civil War. For the women in these groups, the concept of beauty was filtered through a thick lens of white, male prejudice and desire. Imagine yourself not as a pale-skinned woman from the East, but as a young Mexican woman in a town like Santa Fe or a border town in Texas after the Mexican-American War. Your family has lived here for a century. You are now, through no action of your own, a foreigner in your own land. Your beauty, with your dark hair and eyes, is seen by the new white settlers, the Anglos, as exotic. This word, which might sound like a compliment, is a weapon. It is used to cast you as inherently different, more sensual, less virtuous, and, therefore, more sexually available than a white woman. You would walk through the plaza of your own town and endure the stares of white soldiers and prospectors. Their gaze is not the same as the one you experienced. It is not the gaze of men starved for female company. It is the gaze of conquerors. They see your beauty not as something to be won through courtship, but as part of the spoils of war. Another natural resource of this new territory that is theirs for the taking. The respectable white women in town clutch their skirts and look away from you, seeing you not as a sister in femininity, but as a symbol of a lower, more passionate race. Or imagine you are a young Cheyenne or Lakota woman, living in a camp near a U.S. Army fort or a new railroad town. Your beauty is praised in your own culture, tied to concepts of strength, health, and spiritual power. But to the white men who see you when you come to trade, your beauty is something else entirely. They use words like dusky maiden or Pocahontas. They see you as a part of the wilderness they are trying to tame wild, natural, and free of the moral constraints of their own society. This is where you encounter a deeply disturbing and little-known historical phenomenon, the almost complete lack of legal recourse for women of color who were victims of sexual violence. If a white man assaulted a white woman, it was a crime. It might not be prosecuted effectively, as you saw with Blackwood, but it was, on the books, a serious offense. If a white man assaulted a Native American or Mexican woman, it was, in most cases, not considered a crime at all. The white legal system simply did not recognize her as a person with rights to be violated. Her word meant nothing against a white man. There would be no trial, no sheriff, no justice. The violence was not just ignored, it was institutionally sanctioned. The academic debate on this topic is not a debate of if, but of how and why. Historians have spent decades uncovering the harrowing evidence from military records, missionary letters, and native oral histories. The debate now centers on the motivations. Was this violence a tool of conquest? A deliberate strategy to demoralize and subjugate conquered peoples by attacking their women, or was it the inevitable result of a racist ideology that completely dehumanized non-white women, placing them outside the bounds of Christian morality and legal protection? The answer, most historians agree, is a horrifying combination of both. You, in your cabin, are trapped by a flawed man and a harsh landscape, but your cage, you realize, is a privileged one. You have a legal status. You are a wife. If Arthur were to harm you, you would be, in theory, a criminal. For a woman of color, her beauty afforded her no such theoretical protection. It was simply an advertisement of her vulnerability, a marker that singled her out for a specific kind of danger that came with no possibility of appeal, no hope of justice. It was a beauty that carried a curse, sanctioned by the very systems of law and order that were supposedly civilizing the West. The color of your skin, you understand with a chilling clarity, was the most important and most dangerous beauty standard of all. Your newfound understanding of racialized danger isn't just an abstract thought experiment. It has a face. A few miles from Arthur's homestead, deeper in the woods, lives a small, struggling community of Klamath people. They are a remnant of a tribe that was displaced by the influx of white settlers like Arthur. Occasionally, a woman from this community, named Kaiwan, comes to the edge of your clearing to trade. She offers intricately woven baskets or dried berries in exchange for flour or salt. Kaiwan is beautiful. She has a quiet strength and dignity that you admire. Her features are striking, her movements graceful. But you see how the few white men who pass through the area, rappers or loggers, look at her. Their gaze is different from the way they look at you. It is a crude, appraising stare, stripped of even the thinnest veneer of respect. They don't see a person, they see an object of exotic curiosity. They talk about her among themselves in low, crude tones, using dehumanizing language that makes your stomach turn. This notion of exoticist is a key historical concept for understanding this period. For the white male gaze, Kaiwan's beauty was not her own. It was a projection of their own fantasies and prejudices. They saw her as a child of nature, a creature of instinct rather than intellect and morality. This racist trope served a dual purpose. It allowed them to admire her physical appearance as they would a wild animal, a sleek panther, or a graceful doe, while simultaneously denying her humanity. By framing her as part of the wild, they placed her outside the rules of their civilized society. One day, a group of rough-looking loggers are passing through. They stop at your well for water. Arthur is there, and you are nearby, feeding the chickens. Kaiwan arrives at the edge of the clearing, holding a basket. The loggers turn as one, their conversation stopping. One of them, a big man with a red beard, grins. "Well now, no. Look what the woods dragged in," he says, his voice loud and mocking. "Come here, little squaw. Got anything good in that basket?" The word squaw is a slur, a deeply offensive term derived from an Algonquin word for woman, but twisted by white settlers into a derogatory term implying sexual promiscuity and submissiveness. Its use was a deliberate act of degradation. Kaiwan stands her ground, her face a mask of stoicism. She ignores the man and looks only at Arthur, holding up the basket. The logger takes a step towards her. "Don't you ignore me." Girl, Arthur, to your surprise, steps forward. He is smaller than the logger, and his posture is usually stooped and weary, but now he stands straight. "That's enough," he says, his voice low and even. "She is here to trade with me. Leave her be." The logger sizes Arthur up, a sneer on his face, getting mighty protective of the local wildlife. "Farmer." He spits on the ground near Cowan's feet. "Have it your way," he and his companions laugh, then move on down the trail. After they are gone, Arthur completes his trade with Cowan in silence. She nods to him, gives you a brief, unreadable glance, and melts back into the forest. Arthur watches her go, his face grim. He turns to you and says, "Stay away from men like that. They're trouble." He thinks he is protecting you, but you understand something deeper. He just witnessed a demonstration of a power he himself holds. As a white man, his word was enough to deter the loggers. Cowan had no such power. Her only defense was the intervention of a man from the conquering class. Here, you encounter a little-known and tragic detail of this cultural clash. The concept of gift-giving in some native cultures was deliberately misinterpreted by white men as a form of sexual offering. A gesture of hospitality or diplomacy could be twisted into an invitation, further fueling the racist myth of the available native woman. This cultural misunderstanding was often used as a retroactive justification for sexual assault. The academic debate on this topic focuses on the intersection of race, gender, and frontier violence. Was the hyper-vulnerability of women like Cowan an unfortunate byproduct of a chaotic, lawless environment, or was it a structural component of colonization? Many modern historians argue for the latter. They contend that the sexual exploitation of indigenous women was not random, but was central to the process of asserting dominance and dispossessing native peoples of their land and culture. By treating the women as sexually conquerable, white society symbolically conquered the entire race. The violence was a two-love empire. Later that evening, the silence in the cabin feels different. It is charged with the memory of the afternoon's ugly encounter. You look at Arthur, who is silently mending a piece of tack. He defended Cowan, and you feel a flicker of respect for him. But you also recognize the vast, unbridgeable gulf between your experience and hers. Your beauty makes you a target for possessive individuals like Blackwood. Her beauty makes her a target for the casual, violent racism of an entire society. You are trapped in a cage of loneliness. She is trapped in the cage of another man's prejudice. A cage with no visible bars, but one that is, perhaps, even more inescapable. The incident with the loggers lingers in your mind, opening a door to a darker set of stories that circulate in the hushed tones of women. When you finally work up the courage to follow Elk's secret map, you find her homestead, a near-identical copy of your own isolated cabin and clearing. Her husband is away, and the relief on her face at seeing another woman is so profound it's painful to watch. As you share a cup of wheat tea, the conversation eventually turns from the hardships of farming to the hardships of being a woman here. And Elk tells you a story she heard in town. A story that makes the blood run cold in your veins. It's about a Mexican family who lived in a small rancho about a day's ride south. They had a daughter, renowned for her beauty, who was set to be married to a young man from her community. A group of American cattle rustlers, passing through the area, saw her. A few nights later, they stormed the rancho. They drove off the family as livestock, beat the father and the fiancé, and rode off with the girl. You listen, horrified, expecting the next part of the story to be about a posse being formed, about the sheriff riding out to dispense justice. But that's not what happened. The family went to the nearest town, to the American sheriff, and begged for help. The sheriff listened to their story, then shrugged. He said it was a family matter among Mexicans. He said he had no jurisdiction, that he couldn't spare the men to chase after a runaway girl. He did nothing. The girl was never seen again. This is the grim historical reality of bride kidnapping or elopement by capture, an ancient and brutal practice that saw a terrifying resurgence on the lawless frontier. While it could happen to any woman, it was disproportionately targeted at women of color. whose social and legal standing was already precarious. The story Elk tells you is not an isolated incident. It is a pattern for a white man on the frontier, particularly in a group. The act of simply taking a woman was often seen as a bold, if illicit, expression of masculine power. This practice had a particularly sinister twist when it involved women from different cultures. Here is a little-known and disturbing fact: the abduction was sometimes perversely framed as a rescue. A white man might rescue a Native American woman from her savage tribe or a Mexican woman from her backward Catholic family, claiming he was bringing her into the superior world of white, Protestant civilization. This twisted justification turned an act of violent kidnapping into a self-serving act of moral righteousness, making it even more difficult for authorities who often shared the same prejudices to intervene. The story of the stolen girl shocks you to your core. Blackwood's harassment was terrifying. The fight at the dance was humiliating. But this is a different order of magnitude. This is not about unwanted courtship or social pressure. This is about the complete and total erasure of a woman's agency, her family, and her world. She was not courted or claimed she was stolen, like a horse or a sack of grain. The academic debate surrounding this issue was deeply contentious. How widespread was this practice? Official records are, for obvious reasons, almost non-existent. The evidence comes from more oblique sources: anecdotal accounts in diaries, despairing letters from missionaries, and the oral traditions of Native American and Hispanic communities that are filled with tales of stolen women. Some historians argue that while these incidents were horrific, they were likely rare, sensationalized events. Others contend that this is a gross underestimation, that the numbers were far higher and that the practice represented a hidden but constant terror fall on white communities. They argue that the lack of official records is not proof of rarity, but proof of the systemic indifference of the white power structure. Elk tells you another story, this one closer to home. A young woman from the local tribe was forcibly taken as a wife by a white trapper who lived deep in the mountains. The tribe considered her a captive. The trapper considered her his property. When an army patrol passed through, the tribe's leader appealed to the commanding officer for help. The officer's response, recorded in a local missionary's journal, was that he could not interfere in a domestic arrangement. The woman was legally invisible. She was not a citizen to be protected. She was part of a man's household effects. You leave Elka's cabin that day with a new, heavier fear. Your own unhappiness, your own isolation, seems almost like a luxury in comparison. You are a legal wife. You have a name and a status that, however confining, offers a thin layer of protection. The stolen girl had none of that. Her beauty made her a target, and her race made her disposable. The law, which you had seen as merely absent or ineffective, you now see as something far more sinister: an active participant in the violence. A tool that protected the perpetrators by rendering their victims invisible. The Wild West, you realize, was not just a place of absent law. It was a place of selective law, where justice, like beauty, was defined by the color of your skin. Your secret visits to Elk become your only source of sanity. The shared experience, the whispered stories, the simple act of speaking to another woman who understands, it's the only thing that keeps the crushing loneliness at bay. During one of these visits, you witness an event that brings the abstract horror of the selective law into stark, undeniable focus. A circuit judge is visiting the nearest town, a rare occasion for official legal proceedings. Elk's husband has business in town, and she convinces him to take her and you, under the guise of needing supplies, along for the ride. The town is bustling, a miniature version of the first one you arrived in, but with the added gravitas of the law's temporary presence. The courthouse is just the largest room in the saloon, cleared of its tables for the day. 2 cases are being heard. The first involves a white homesteader who accuses his neighbor of stealing a pig. The proceedings are serious and methodical. Witnesses are called. Evidence, such as footprints and a broken fence post, is presented. The judge, a stern man with a flowing beard, listens intently. The entire community is invested. debating the merits of the case in hushed tones. The theft of a pig is a serious matter of property and livelihood. After an hour of testimony, the judge finds the neighbor guilty and orders him to pay restitution of 2 pigs to the plaintiff. Justice, for the pig, has been swift and clear. Then, the second case is called. It is brought by Kaiwan's people. An elder from her community steps forward to accuse one of the loggers, the same red-bearded man you saw before, of assaulting a young woman from their village. The girl stands beside the elder, her head bowed, her body wrapped in a traditional blanket, her face hidden in its folds. The atmosphere in the room shifts instantly. The respectful silence is replaced by murmurs and snickers. The judge, who had been so attentive during the pig trial, now leans back in his chair, a look of bored impatience on his face. The elder speaks, his words translated by a nervous-looking missionary. He describes the attack in clear, damning detail. The evidence he offers is the girl's own testimony and that of her family. When he is finished, the judge turns to the logger, who is slouched against a wall with his friends, looking unconcerned. "Well, what do you say, man?" The logger laughs. "She's a squaw, Your Honor. They're always making up stories like that to get money or whiskey. She was willing." "Diolo." The judge doesn't ask the girl for her side of the story. He doesn't call any other witnesses. He bangs his gavel on the table, the sound startlingly loud. "Case dismissed for lack of credible evidence. Don't waste the court's time with this kind of nonsense again." And that's it. A man's pig is worth an hour of the court's time, a full investigation, and a considered judgment. A native woman's body and dignity are worth less than 5 minutes and are dismissed with an insult. You are witnessing to systems of justice operating in the same room. At the same time, the law is not a blindfolded lady holding a scale. She is a creature with her eyes wide open, and she sees color and gender very clearly. This is the historical reality of the frontier justice system. It was not designed to protect everyone equally. It was designed to protect the property and interests of the white, male settlers who created it. The legal personhood of women was limited, and the legal personhood of people of color was, in many contexts, non-existent. A particularly bizarre and little-known legal doctrine that highlights this is the racial prerequisite for citizenship. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, U.S. law stated that only free white persons and, after the Civil War, persons of African nativity or descent could become naturalized citizens. This left Native Americans and Asians in a legal limbo. They were not considered citizens and therefore lacked the fundamental rights and protections that came with that status, including, in many places, the right to testify in court against a white person. A law intended to define citizenship became a tool that enabled violence. The academic debate here is intense and politically charged. For years, the traditional narrative of frontier justice celebrated the rough and ready law of the West, embodied by figures like Judge Roy Bean, the law west of the Pecos. It was seen as pragmatic and effective, if unconventional. Modern historians have forcefully challenged this narrative, exposing it as a deeply racist and sexist reality. They argue that the legal system was not just flawed, but was an instrument of colonial power. Its primary function was not to dispense impartial justice, but to legitimize the disposition of native lands and to enforce a rigid racial and social hierarchy. The dismissal of Kaiwan's case was not a failure of the system, it was the system working exactly as it was intended. You watch as the elder leads the shamed, silent girl out of the saloon. Their dignity in the face of such profound injustice is heartbreaking. The loggers are laughing, tapping their friend on the back. The pig owner is happily discussing his victory. The world has been put back in its proper order according to the laws of this new land. You feel a wave of nausea. The law, which you once saw as a potential shield, you now see as a sword, and its sharpest edge is reserved for women who look like Kaiwan. You, Delk, Kaiwan, you are all women in this hostile world, but you are living under 2 entirely different sets of laws. And you understand that the most dangerous thing about being a beautiful woman in the West was not the absence of law, but its presence. The travesty of justice you witnessed in town leaves a permanent mark on you. The sight of the young native girl, silenced and shamed by the very system that should have protected her, is a burden you now carry. It clarifies the stark reality of your world. Formal power structures, the law, the government, the church are not your allies. If there is any hope of survival, let alone of finding a life worth living, it will not come from them. It will have to come from somewhere else. It comes from elk. Your clandestine meetings, born of desperation, slowly evolve into something more. They become a council of war, a support group, a tyranny to personal rebellion. You are no longer just sharing stories of your unhappiness, you are building a partnership. When a batch of your bread is ruined, she brings you a cup of her own sourdough starter, a precious, living thing. When her husband is laid up with a fever, you walk the miles to her cabin to help with the chores, lying to Arthur that you were foraging for berries. You are building a secret, parallel economy based on mutual aid and trust. This formation of female alliances is a critical, though often hidden, chapter in the history of the West. While men were forming posses and business partnerships, women were forming their own networks, built not on contracts and capital. In the home, they created a world within a world, a society that operated on principles of reciprocity and shared knowledge. You start to expand your network, carefully and cautiously. You learn from Elk that the wife of the town's blacksmith, a stern-faced woman you had been afraid of, runs a quiet trade in herbal remedies. You approach her, ostensibly to buy soap, and end up in a hushed conversation about which plants can be used to treat a fever and which can be used to soothe a troubled mind. She gives you a small bag of dried chamomile, her advice a gift far more valuable than the herbs themselves. You have been initiated into another layer of the secret women's world. A little-known and fascinating aspect of this was the gossip network. Gossip, a term now used dismissively, was actually a vital tool for women's safety and social navigation. It was a highly efficient, informal intelligence-gathering system. Through these networks, women knew which men were kind and which were violent, which merchants were honest and which were cheats, which trails were safe and which were not. A man's public reputation might be sterling, but the women's network would have the real story, pieced together from a dozen different observations and whispered conversations. It was a way of holding men accountable when the formal legal system would not. Your small alliance begins to take on a more daring purpose. You learn that another mail-order bride, a young Irish girl named Maeve, has arrived in the neighboring valley. Her situation, you hear through the gossip network, is dire. Her husband is a drunkard who beats her. She is terrified, isolated, and has nowhere to turn. You and Elk, with the quiet help of the blacksmith's wife, decide to act. It's an incredibly risky plan. The blacksmith's wife arranges for a message to be passed to Maeve through a sympathetic freighter, who delivers supplies to her valley. The message is simply a drawing of a bluebird, a symbol you and Elk have adopted as your own. If Maeve wants help, she is to leave a similar sign, a small cross stitched with blue thread, on a sack of flour to be picked up by the freighter. The academic debate here focuses on the nature and scope of this female resistance. Was it merely palliative, a way to make an unbearable situation slightly more tolerable, or could it be considered a form of genuine political resistance? Some historians argue that these small, domestic acts of mutual support, while important for survival, did little to challenge the overarching patriarchal power structure. Others, however, argue that this view misses the point. In a system where women were intentionally isolated and rendered powerless, the very act of forming a clandestine network was a radical act of defiance. By creating their own systems of communication, trade, and even justice, they were directly challenging the male monopoly on power. Their resistance was quiet, but it was resistance nonetheless. A week later, the freighter returns. The blacksmith's wife meets him, and on one of the flour sacks is a small, clumsily stitched blue cross. The signal has been received. Maiev wants out. The plan you concoct is terrifying in its audacity. The freighter agrees to hire Maiev as a cook for his next long haul. A plausible excuse to get her away from her husband. He will drop her in a larger town down the line, where the blacksmith's wife has a cousin who runs a boarding house. You and Del contribute the small amounts of egg money you've managed to save, scraping together enough for Maev's passage and a little to start over. It's a conspiracy. A miniature underground railroad, run by a handful of isolated, seemingly powerless women. The night before the plan is set in motion. You lie awake in your silent cabin next to the sleeping form of Arthur. You are more afraid than you had ever been. If you are caught, the consequences are unthinkable. But for the first time since you arrived in the West, you are not just a victim. You are an agent. You are part of a secret, powerful sisterhood, bound by shared risk and a fierce, quiet determination to protect your own. The alliance you have built is the only law you can trust, the only community that matters. It's a fragile web, spun in the shadows, but it's the strongest thing in your world. The rescue of Maiev is a success. The freighter's wagon rumbles away from her valley with one extra passenger, and her abusive husband is left with nothing but a cold cabin and a note saying she has gone to find work. He might be furious, but in a world that views women as flighty and unreliable, her departure is more likely to be seen as an embarrassment to him than a crime to be investigated. You and your small network have won. The victory is silent and invisible to the world, but it feels monumental. This success emboldens you. It teaches you a crucial lesson about power in this lopsided world. Direct confrontation, as you saw with Blackwood, is dangerous and often futile. The formal legal system is a hostile territory. The true weapons of the weaker sex are indirect, subtle, and underestimated. You have learned to fight not with a fist, but with a whisper. You become a more astute observer of the men around you, especially Arthur. You realize that his silence, which you once saw as a sign of his power over you, is also his greatest weakness. He is a man of simple, predictable routines, a man who notices little beyond the state of his crops and the health of his mule. This makes him easy to deceive. Your secret trips to see elk, your squirreling away of small resources, these things are possible because he is not paying attention. His neglect, which is the source of your misery, has also become the foundation of your freedom. You learn to wield the subtle power of domesticity. You learn that a well-cooked meal can soothe his temper after a hard day, making him less likely to question where you were that afternoon. You learn that by taking on more and more of the household management, you gain control over the small but vital economy of the homestead. You are the one who knows how much flour is left, how many eggs are stored, how much salt needs to be purchased on the next trip to town. This knowledge is a form of power. This is a classic historical concept, the separate spheres ideology of the 19th century. The public sphere of work, politics, and law belonged to men, while the private sphere of the home belonged to women. While this was designed to be a limiting, confining structure for women, many learned to turn their sphere into a small kingdom where they ruled supreme. A man might be the master of his farm, but his wife was the master of his household, and she could use that power in ways he never anticipated. You also discover the potent weapon of male pride. You see it in town, watching the way other women manage their husbands. A woman can get what she wants not by demanding it, but by framing it as her husband's idea. A clever wife might say, "You are so much better at negotiating with that merchant than I am. Would you be willing to trade these eggs for me?" By flattering his ego and reinforcing his sense of competence, she achieves her goal without a fight. It is a form of psychological jujitsu, using the opponent's own weight and momentum against him. A strange and little-known example of this kind of indirect resistance was the temperance movement. While it is often seen as a moral crusade led by pious women, it also had a deeply practical, economic motive. For many women, a husband who spent his wages at the saloon was a direct threat to the family's survival. The fight against alcohol was also a fight for control over the household budget. Women couldn't vote or pass laws. But by using the moral language of the church in the home, they could exert immense social pressure, shaming men and politicians into action. It was a brilliant indirect assault on a male institution that harmed them directly. The academic debate here is about interpreting these actions. Are these examples of women cleverly subverting the patriarchy from within, or are they simply survival strategies that ultimately reinforce the very system they seem to challenge by playing the role of the dutiful wife to get what she wants? Is a woman not just perpetuating the stereotype that women must be manipulative and indirect? There is no easy answer. It is a paradox of resistance. To gain a small measure of freedom, you must often perform the role of the unfree. You start to apply these tactics in your own life. You need to make another trip to see elk. So you tell Arthur, the blacksmith's wife told me about a patch of wild onions that grow by the creek. You know how much you enjoy onions too. I thought I might go and gather some this afternoon. You have appealed to his stomach, reinforced his role as the beneficiary of your domestic labor, and provided a plausible reason for your absence. He grants his approval without looking up from his work. It is a small, hollow victory. You feel a pang of guilt at the deception, but it is overshadowed by the quiet thrill of your own agency. You are no longer just a passive character in Arthur's story. You are writing your own secret narrative in the margins. You have learned that in a world that denies you a voice, you must learn to speak in code. And in a world that denies you overt power, you must learn to cultivate it in the shadows, like a mushroom, in the dark, damp places where no one thinks to look. The success of your small conspiracy, the rescue of Meow, has created a new kind of bond between you and Elk. Your conversations are no longer just about survival, they are about possibilities. During one of your meetings, while shelling peas on her porch, Elk tells you a story that is the complete opposite of Meow's story, that feels less like a whispered secret and more like a local legend. She tells you about a woman named Mrs. Miller, who lives 2 valleys over. She was a mail-order bride, just like you, who came west to marry a rancher. He was a decent man, but the life was hard, and a few years after they married, he was killed in a riding accident. Everyone expected Mrs. Miller, the grieving widow from the east, to sell the ranch for a pittance and go home, but she didn't. She stayed. She took over the ranch, the brand, the cattle, and the 3 surly ranch hands her husband had employed. This is your introduction to a rare but powerful figure in Western law, the cattle queen. While the cattle industry was overwhelmingly male, a handful of women, often through widowhood or inheritance, entered the fray, and some of them didn't just survive, they thrived, building empires that rivaled those of any man. They are the great, shining exceptions to the rule of female subjugation. Elk describes Mrs. Miller with a kind of awe. She learned to ride like a man, rode like a man, and, most importantly, cuss like a man. She personally oversaw the roundups, sleeping on the ground with her crew. She faced down rustlers and negotiated shrewdly with cattle buyers in towns 100 miles away. The ranch hands who initially scoffed at taking orders from a woman quickly learned to respect her, or fear her. She was, by all accounts, tougher and smarter than her late husband had ever been. She was no longer just Mrs. Miller. She was Miller of the Double M, a name that was its own form of power. This story sparks a fire in your imagination. It presents a model of female power that is the antithesis of your own quiet, deceptive strategies. Mrs. Miller did not use subtle manipulation, she used direct force of will. She did not operate in the shadows, she rode out in the broad daylight. And here lies a strange, ironic, little-known fact of 19th century law for many women. Widowhood was a gateway to legal and economic freedom. Under the legal principle of C over Chet, a married woman's legal identity was subsumed by her husband's. She couldn't own property in her own name, sign contracts, or sue in court. But as a widow, she was legally a famous soul. A woman alone, she regained her independent legal status. She could own land, run a business, and control her own finances. in a bizarre twist of fate. The death of her husband, while a personal tragedy, was the event that allowed a woman like Mrs. Miller to become a titan. The patriarchy, in its effort to provide for widows, accidentally created a loophole through which a few formidable women could slip into power. You think of Madame Rose. Back in that first town, she was another version of this story. She had accumulated wealth and power in one of the few industries open to women, ruling her own small kingdom with an iron fist. These women, the cattle queens and the saloon madams, were the rare success stories. They had beaten the system at its own game. But as Elk finishes her story, a sobering thought settles over you. The academic world is still debating the meaning of these exceptional figures. Are they evidence that the West was a land of opportunity for anyone with enough grit? Regardless of gender, this is the traditional, romantic view. Or are they, as many feminist historians argue, such dramatic outliers that they only serve to highlight the overwhelming oppression faced by ordinary women? This more critical view suggests that for every one Mrs. Miller, there were 10,000 women like you, Elk, and Mievtrop, isolated and struggling, furthermore, to succeed. These women often had to adopt masculine traits or operate in a morally compromised world, effectively sacrificing their femininity to gain power. They didn't change the rules of the game, they just learned to play it better than most men. You look at your own hands, soft compared to Elka's, but still chapped from mice opened holding water. You try to imagine them holding the reins of a cattle empire, or the ledger of a profitable saloon. The fantasy feels distant, impossible. Mrs. Miller's story is not a blueprint for you to follow, it's a myth. It's a campfire tale told to give a flicker of hope in the darkness. A reminder that the cage is not, in theory, escape-proof. But you know the truth. These women are phoenixes, rising from the ashes of their former lives. They are magnificent, rare, and almost certainly not you. Their stories are inspiring, but they also underscore the crushing reality of your own situation. They succeeded by becoming, in essence, been in a man's world. You have no desire to do that. You just want a life of quiet dignity, a life where you are not a prisoner, a life where your choices are your own. And that, you realize, might be an even more impossible dream than owning 1,000 head of cattle. The success stories are dazzling, but they are stars in a vast and empty sky, and their light only serves to show you how deep the surrounding darkness really is. Years pass. The relentless rhythm of the seasons on the homestead becomes the rhythm of your life. The saplings that Arthur called his orchard grow into actual trees, their branches heavy with fruit in the autumn. The silence in the cabin does not lessen, but it changes its character. It is no longer the tense, awkward silence of two strangers. It is the warm, comfortable silence of two people who have endured the same hardships, weathered the same storms, and survived. Arthur grows older, his body stooped and worn down by the unceasing labor. You are no longer the frightened girl who stepped off the stagecoach. The lines of worry and exhaustion on your face are a map of your own long journey. There was no single, dramatic moment of confrontation or escape. There was only the slow, grinding passage of time, and the gradual, almost imperceptible shifts in the balance of power within your tiny world. Your secret alliance with Elk and the other women remains your most precious possession. It is a source of strength, comfort, and quiet rebellion. You have helped another woman escape a bad situation. You have traded remedies and warnings. You have built a community where none was supposed to exist. You have not changed the world, but you have changed your corner of it. One day, a surveyor comes through the valley, part of a team planning a new railroad spur. He brings news from the outside world. The first town you ever set foot in, the dusty, violent boomtown, has a proper school now, and a church with a real steeple. The infamous Golden Garter saloon burned down years ago. And Madame Rose, they say, retired a wealthy woman and moved to San Francisco. Blackwood, the menacing suitor, was shot and killed in a dispute over a poker game. Jed, the handsome cattleman, married the banker's daughter and is now a respected town councilman. The Wild West has been tamed, not by heroic lawmen, but by the slow, inexorable march of fences, railroads, and families. The world is changing. This is the great, overarching narrative of the West, the closing of the frontier. By the 1892, the U.S. Census Bureau famously declared that there was no longer a continuous frontier line. The chaotic, lawless era you first entered was drawing to a close, being replaced by a more settled, structured, and, in many ways, more civilized society. The extreme gender imbalances were evening out. The rule of law, however flawed, was becoming more consistent. But as you listen to this news, you feel a strange sense of ambivalence. The world that was so dangerous for you is vanishing, but in its place is a world that is more rigid, more ordered. The wild, untamed landscape is being carved up and solved. The wild, untamed passions are being corralled by social convention. You have survived the chaos, but you wonder what it will be like to live in the order that follows. This is a key debate among historians looking back at this period. Was the civilizing of the West an unequivocal good for women on one hand? Yes. The increased presence of law and order undoubtedly made life safer. A woman was less likely to be abducted or to be caught in the crossfire of a saloon brawl. On the other hand, the arrival of civilization also brought with it the more rigid social structures of the East. The separate spheres became more firmly entrenched. The opportunities for unconventional women like Mrs. Miller or Madame Rose began to disappear. The cage, in a sense, became smaller, but more securely locked. A woman might be safer, but she might also be less free. A little-known consequence of this taming was the decline of many female-run businesses. As towns grew, laundry services, for example, which were often started and run by women, one of the few socially acceptable enterprises, were pushed out by larger, male-owned commercial operations. The informal economies where women had thrived began to shrink. You sit on your porch, looking out at the valley. Your life has not been the one you dreamed of, nor has it been the nightmare you feared. It has been something in between, a long, quiet struggle marked by moments of despair and small, sacred victories. You look at your hands. They are not the hands of a cattle queen, but they are the hands of a survivor. They have planted gardens, mended clothes, baked bread, and passed secret notes that saved a life. You think about the nature of beauty, the thing that started this whole journey, the beauty that made you a target in that first town, the beauty that made you a desirable commodity for a mail-order husband, the beauty that, for women like Kaiwan, was a terrible curse. You have learned that beauty in a lawless world is not a gift. It is a vulnerability. It is the thing that makes you seen. And being seen is the most dangerous thing of all. The sun sets, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors you saw on your first night here. The dust is settling, not just on the valley, but on an entire era. You survived. That, in itself, is a victory. The cost was high, paid in loneliness and fear, but you are still here, and in the quiet of the evening, you can hear the distant, lonely whistle of a train, a sound that signals the end of one kind of wilderness and the beginning of another. The train whistle fades, a long, mournful sound that seems to pull the last of the light from the sky. The deep purple of twilight settles over the valley, softening the sharp edges of the mountains and the rigid lines of the fences. The air grows cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. You draw your shawl a little tighter around your shoulders, the rough wool a familiar comfort against your skin. The day's work is done. Arthur is asleep inside. His quiet, rhythmic breathing a sound as constant as the chirping of the crickets that have begun their nightly chorus. You are no longer waiting for something to happen. You are no longer braced for a threat or planning an escape. The years have smoothed the sharp edges of your fear into a kind of quiet watchfulness. The story is not over, but this chapter, the one written in the ink of survival and adrenaline, has come to a close. The narrative of your life has been a river, sometimes turbulent and frightening, but it has now found a wider, slower channel. You let the gentle sounds of the night wash over you, a soft hum that lulls the mind and soothes the heart. You can rest now. The watch is over. The long, deep breath you've been holding for years can finally be released into the quiet, stormy air. The end of the article. Good night.